PAC branch. Africa, attendance register and say it's at around but often I resign that attendance register. But before we start, let me acknowledge the presence of the national organizer of the PAC, who is with us.
Zimbabwe today,
Azania tomorrow. Thank you, my friend. We really appreciate your presence. So, Africa, you'll see that this workshop is blessed also at the level of national leadership. Africa, my name is Shoni. I'm going to facilitate this particular workshop. I was talking to one Africa in a taxi who is in these social movements. And I was saying, comrades, you must come and attend our workshop. We want to arm our members with theory. We want to arm our members with the weapons of theory. Because you see in Africa, although some of us, Africa Bruce, we say practice is the key. You know, there's been one man named China who emphasized practice. His name is Mao Zedong, you know. Now I'm addressing you, Africa Bruce. Yeah, no, I'm saying despite the importance of practice, you need theory, because practice without theory becomes futile. And you need the forces, practice, because they have a theoretical foundation. Hence the importance of this particular workshop. But Africa, this is one of the resolutions at an AGM of the branch to say one of our key areas in the plan of action is political workshops. So this is also a resolution here at PNP. But in Africa, we are going to be faced with serious battles. Africa told me we are going to have serious campaigns early next year around prepaid meters, in PV. So before, we fight those battles, we really need to define who are we fighting in this current state. Are we fighting a neo-colonial state or are we fighting a settler colonial state? So Africa, you will engage the two panelists here. On my left, Africa without any political connotations, but on my left, I am Comrade Raymond Khafut. So you want me to say also on my left, Kiskaro on my right. Because it's politically correct to say you are on the right. Yeah, Africa on my right, we have Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to one councillor who was saying to me, that is what the Freedom Front Plus. You are the extreme right, And I tried I was pissed off Africa because I said, this person does not know the difference between left and right. And he's a councillor in Johannesburg. How do you say the PAC is the extreme right? Because, PAC says drive white people to the sea. Let's say it's a given. You are saying let them go to the sea. But how do you then say a socialist party is on the right? You see, even in Britain, when they sit, how do you come left? You are more on the socialist, seat than when you are on the right. So in some of those things, Africa one, I think also these councillors, they must come to these particular workshops to learn the basics, differentiate between left and right. Africa, without wasting any time, I recognize Africa view. I think he's taking some video of this particular meeting. Thanks, Africa viewer, for your job. I don't wish they end up in the public broadcast. Africa, our topic is SA a neo-colonial state, or is it still a settler colonial state? African Kuruma says South Africa is a neo-colonial state. That's what African Kuruma is saying. African is saying South Africa is a settler colonial state. I'm not sure, Africa. These are our intellectuals in the PAC. But if they disagree, then I'm not sure. Africa, Kuruma, hand over to you.
Yeah, easily. We can start Africa. I said to Africa, so let's start. Southern I don't address. There's a document that we have. I'm going to go through that particular document. And in various sections, I will elaborate where I can elaborate. I've tried my level plus in Africa to tone in a manner that even those who are new members in the party who will come to this workshop will not have a difficulty to relate to the language that has been used. And also I've tried to keep the short as I can, to 10 pages. I'm worried about the number of pages that not can do ahead.
Don't worry, but I kept it at 10 pages.
As Africa's colleague has explained, that the topic is South Africa a neo-colonial state, or is it still a settler colonial state? But I think also what came out from the previous workshop, that one that we had with Pan-Africanism, was also a question as to whether was there a transfer of political power in 1994. So the attempt is to in the process of discussing the issue of neo-colonialism or settler colonialism, but also try to respond to the aspect of the transfer of political power. And I think that it was the kind of a document that one tries to deal with that particular aspect of transfer of political power. Now, on introduction, on the afternoon of the 3rd of November 2012, the PAC Infiltration Branch held a political workshop which focused on 2 key aspects, namely governance and the branch strategy and plan of action. Those are the issues that we dealt with in the previous workshop. Arising mainly from the budget and political orientation debate, were arguments pertaining to the current political state of Azania in South Africa. That is post-1994 political transition, including an inquisition if there was a transfer of political power that is from central minority regime to the African majority. Now, the PAC Commissar's field manual describes the character of our revolution in racist South Africa as, I quote, that of the overthrow of imperialism and white domination in order to achieve complete national liberation and social emancipation, close quotes. Now, the Commissar's field manual further argues and states that our immediate duty is to launch a struggle for democracy aimed at eliminating the power and influence of the present capitalist and racist setup, introduce an agrarian revolution to abolish feudal relations in the countryside and establish locally based government embracing the political power of the people of our country, close quote. It is this advice emanating from the PAC Commissar's field manual that this paper will base its deliberations on the question posed as to determine if South Africa is a neo-colonial or a settler-colonial state. In other words, for me, there must be a basis to assess something. There must be a base, there must be a premise, a particular frame of reference that we can use to assess and judge as to whether was there a change or was no change and so forth. Now, the Commissar's manual becomes, having quoted that particular section, becomes the most appropriate one because of it succinctly captures what PAC seeks to try to achieve in a more programmatic fashion. And you can go also, I think it expands nicely and explicitly the 5 ancient objectives of the PAC, although it does not take it further in terms of to establish a unified continent on a socialist thought. It does not go further that particular aspect. But what it does in a very succinct manner, in a very clear manner, it clearly describes our immediate duty as a party, right? That will become central in the issue of the power that must be eliminated is the present capitalist and racist setup that is prevalent in the country. Now, arguably, and I think you'll be able to pick it up, that the manifestations of capitalism may vary, right? But the foundation and the base has always been the same, which is capitalism throughout. Manifestation itself in terms of slavery, in terms of colonialism, and neo-colonialism. And that's the crux of the argument that I will be able to advance. The paper will focus primarily on these 2 aspects, being the question posed as follows. Is South Africa a neo-colonial or a settler-colonial state? Was there a transfer of political power in 1994 dispensation? Now, the issue of dispensation in 1994, it will revolve around what we understand as political power and how do you amass a political power. At that stage, can you then argue that indeed we have or we don't have political power? And how do you define and describe processes that will be able to identify that indeed in this particular case there is an exercise of political power. And deliberately we give a distinction of political power exercise and political administration, for the 2 are different, right? And then in the document at some point I clearly expose what is understood to become political administration and it being distinct from political power. The paper will firstly discuss and seek to define and describe the neo-colonial state and later discuss the 1994 political transfer of power. In pursuing this task, the paper will briefly provide a brief historical development of the social and political occurrences in South Africa since 1652 till today, and later focus on the two aspects, namely, is South Africa a neo-colonial state and was there transfer of political power in 1994 dispensation. Now, on the brief social and political occurrences of South Africa, it's rather a larger section, but I wouldn't go through the entire aspect. Now, your typical Marxist argument of historical materialism, but also in the basic document of the PC, you get that, where the basic document of the PC, when it gives an account of where Africa is when it was formulated in 1959, the 15 African states that were independent, there's an account in terms of the evolution of the African Revolution. Right? So in that particular aspect, one says that you cannot speak about the current state without going through the past in terms of where we actually come from as a people. Now, I quote Cecil John Rhodes as a PAC member. Right. Cecil John Rhodes says, we must find new lands from which we can easily obtain raw materials and at the same time exploit the cheap labor, slave labor, that is available from the natives of the colonies. The colonies will also provide a dumping ground for the surplus goods produced in our country's close coast. That is Cecil John Rhodes. Now, when you read Adam Smith, A Wealth of the Nations, where he speaks about Africa and Asian countries, you pick up the very same pattern, where now both of them they define and locate this particular what Cecil John Rhodes describes as from the natives of the colonies, right? What they seek from colonies, and they also locate the role of the labor of those particular colonies. Now the question is, from Adam Smith, Wealth of the Nations written about 1860 something and so forth, to Cecil John Rhodes around 1900, 1910 and so forth, right? The thrust is still the same, right? Still the same. And these people are years apart, but the thrust is still the same, right? And later on, I hope I'll be able to expose that that particular thrust from Cecil John Rhodes, it has never changed. It has been fundamental and basic essence of what drove the evolution and development of capitalism, though it may have manifested itself in different forms. The development of capitalism in South Africa is used to be commonly related to the peculiar evolution of imperialism and the rise of the apartheid ideology and social system in 1948 constituted that racial social complex based on the capitalist foundation. This therefore implies that the peculiar evolution of South African capitalism, with its strong reliance on cheap black African labor, as advocated by Cecil John Rhodes as the code stated above. Thus, the apartheid system is not only a product of earlier racial prejudice and policies imposed by the Dutch and the British settlers. However, it also represents a manifestation of capitalist quest to raw material and cheap native labor for exploitation. The capitalist quest with its racial form led to a combination of several factors, being colonial conquest, land dispossession, economic impoverishment, and exclusion of the indigenous Africans, including being exclusion of the indigenous Africans, including being deprived citizenship status in their own land of birth. Such capitalist settler policies thus paved the way to apartheid. The historical roots of the apartheid system are factually traced from the colonial occupation of the Cape in 1652 through the creation of the Union of South Africa and the segregation period, that is 1910 to 1948. And this assumed the patterns of economic and political transformation and usage of racism and segregation increasingly restricted the lives of the black South Africans. Three main interrelated forces influence the nature of the South African society and economy. That is colonial conquest, as I stated later on, the expansion of mining and industrialization, including agriculture, with the Africans' role being defined as stewards of wood and drawers of water. That is cheap native labor. Colonial conquest by the Netherlands and after 1795 by the British stimulated limited, if uneven, capitalist growth. The Dutch East Indian Company established a settlement of Cape of Good Hope in 1652, which gradually expanded along the frontier at the expense of the Khoikhoi, the Xhosa and indigenous people, a process similar to the one that unfolded in North America, Australia, and New Zealand. In South Africa, the destruction of the Khoi societies produced an underclass of domestic and farm workers, but their ability to earn a decent wage was severely curtailed by the Dutch East India Company use of slaves imported from Angola, Mozambique, Madagascar, and Southeast Asia. In essence, the argument in that particular case is that the experience of settler colonialism has a deliberate force, a deliberate thrust of displacement, of literal displacement of the indigenous people. An example, I've given an example of North America, Australia, and New Zealand. Right now, by displacement, what do I mean? In other cases, other writers will tell you that there is an extermination of the indigenous people. A literal extermination of the indigenous people, where the indigenous people becomes a minority. Canada is one typical example. Where the displacement understood in that particular experience resulted to the indigenous people being exterminated. There's also aspect of acculturation. And that aspect of acculturation, as I've indicated about the Khoi, where there's been an attempt of displacement of the Khoi people, but furthermore, the Khoi people being reduced to provide domestic labor services, and then them losing the means of living as they used to have. Now, the liberty was settler colonialism amongst other things, but the most primary aspect, in addition to colonial conquest, annexation, is an aspect of cultural assimilation, but above all, the issue of extermination of the indigenous people. Now, globally, in the entire world, successful settler colonial programs, we speak of Australia, we speak of New Zealand, we speak about America and Canada. Where now you can arguably confirm that the indigenous people in those particular parts of the world are a minority. In Canada, as I've stated, in Canada, the indigenous people are less than 10%, less than 5% of the total population. Our experience here, there was been an attempt of settler colonialism, right? And it did not necessarily attain the objectives as experienced in countries like Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. However, in terms of the cultural aspect of it, the acculturation part of it, and the economic aspect of it, right? Indeed, it has been successful. Purely because of, other writers, other scholars will say today in South Africa that the Africans are numerically, they are a numeric majority. However, economically, we are a minority simply because we don't have command and control over the means of production. It was whether nationalist or Marxist, we don't have control over the means of production. Now, economically, the Africans in this particular part of the world, we are a minority. But in population terms, we are a numeric majority. But our numeric numbers does not possess and give us an ability to influence and shape state policy purely because of that particular power is dependent upon control over the means of production. I will jump to page 4. I will go to some part of that below. Now, industrialization and British imperialism in South Africa, driven by economic and political ambitions, and the individual actions of mining magnates like Cecil John Rhodes, resulted in a slow but steady expansion of manufacturing and transport infrastructure. The British government fashioned a more uniform policy after the South African War of 1899-1902, what is commonly called Anglo-Boer War, when the Act of Union of 1910 brought together the previously separate colonies of the Orange Free State, Transvaal, Natal, and Cape to form the Union of South Africa, which later became a white dominion of the British Empire. In response, a group of black middle class South African, that is African, black middle class, traveled to London to petition Parliament to reject the denial of the vote to Africans in 1910 Act of the Union. But their voice went unheard. In the end, the British and the Boers, that is the Afrikaners, put aside the bitterness of war in order to entrench what I view as white power in Germany and privileges, whilst depriving the indigenous African majority the right to national sovereignty and self-determination. In the first 2 decades of the Union, the government of Walter Jan Smuts and J.B. Herzog promulgated a barrage of discriminatory laws and regulations that tightened state control over blacks or over the Africans. The most important law passed was the Native Land Act of 1913. This law reserved 83% that is of the land, and it was revised later on to 87% in 1936. In South Africa for whites, it prevented Africans, 2/3 of the population at that time, from freely buying or controlling land. The small African reserve created by the Land Act were a forerunner of the apartheid era Bantustan or homelands. Life in the rural reserves was harsh, with the illnesses and malnutrition rise. For many Africans, especially young men and women, migration to wage earning jobs in cities and mining became one of the only ways to pay colonial taxes and survive. Now, in essence, in that aspect is that what then emerged is imagine the urbanization and the industrialization, control of land, and many other aspects, agriculture and so forth, led to the emergence of an African proletariat and African labor from that particular system of social design. As African earlier on, and as hinted from the quotation of Cecil John Rhodes, that what was required from the natives, or from the colonies, it was 2 things: raw material and slave labor. Through the two, they are able to combine to drive their own capital industrialization process and to serve their own needs. Massive urbanization was the most important social development between World War I and World War II. The number of city dwellings of Africans more than tripled in 30 years, from 1904 to 1936. Right? Now, with the rise of urbanization, more Africans coming to urban areas, the numbers increased. The urban growth occurred in a context of intensified city segregation. Africans in cities lived in terrible conditions with inadequate housing, poor health, transport services, and no electricity for many decades. Along with poverty came crime and fear for personal safety. Segregation also caused unprecedented gender imbalance, with more men working in urban areas than women. Obviously, that's how the capitalist system was designed, and that's how the segregation also in South Africa served in terms of demand of men to provide labor, and women or female being reduced to either in houses or to the villages. Segregation also caused unprecedented gender. Okay. However, from 1921 to 1936, there was a 142% increase in number of urban African women, many of whom came to the cities to be with their husbands, but often lived a precarious life without legal residence rights. As more blacks moved to urban areas, whites came to view the city as a European area in which there is no place the redundant natives can occupy. In the words of the Natives Affairs Commission of 1921, the 1923 Natives or Urban Areas Act restricted African migration into towns, laying the foundation of urban residential segregation. Whites also sought to take control of black workers by passing laws in the 1920s that severely curtailed black economic freedom, including prohibition of forming unions. Now, though one draws from the previous patterns of policies and what was done in the past, even today when we look in terms of the geographic, socio-political design within the country, the social structure within the country, you still see the patterns. You read what happened between 1904 to 1936, 1923, the effect and the plan of Urban Areas Act in 1920s. But even today in the country, when you look at the distribution of population and grouping and so forth, you still see segregation along racial lines, right? And that has never been altered. And there's argument that some of the patterns are driven primarily by the issue of economic control, with the African being deprived access to what fundamentally contributes towards an emergence or growth of wealth and generation of wealth and what becomes an economic system. By the 1930s, the government segregation stance hardened further. Amendments to the Masters and Servants Act, for instance, legalized whipping. Now, Masters Servants Act is what we still find in the Labor Relations Act today. Because in the Labor Relations Act, the employer is given the power. In an event, workers refuse to work based on whatever grievances that they have, right? The power that the employer has and protected by the law, right, is the employer can get escape labor and continue production, and the workers can be deprived their monthly wages and so forth and so forth. And now, using economic power as a method to whip the black labor for them to refuse to sell their labor on the basis of demand. So there may have been some adaptation from Master Servants Act to what becomes the Labor Relations Act today, but fundamentally, what does it mean in terms of the very same master, and the very same master being commonly white, capitalist, and today it is the same pattern that is prevalent, right? Irrespective of what the LRA does. The LRA does not in any way, it gives the workers the right to strike, but it does not give a balance of power. That when a worker is on a strike, the employer also is deprived to get escape labor, such that the two, conflict of the two, if it continues, then the victor can be determined in terms of their own conflicts. But the system has allowed the employer to find alternative methods so that the employer can be able to find anything. Now, when we read Masters and Servants Act, you can still find that the system has always given the masters, those who own the means of production, authority and power over the native labor. There were important continuities between segregation and apartheid in both eras. Black people faced condescending and restrictive policies, discriminating residents and labor laws, and denied to exercise the right to national sovereignty and self-determination. The pre-apartheid period saw considerable and forced racial segregation in economy and society. In both periods, the majority of white supremacy prevailed. These similarities have led some scholars to see apartheid simply as an intensification of segregation. Under apartheid, however, racism and segregation became thoroughly rigid and institutionalized in a solid capitalist economic foundation. The source for that, for those who are interested, is a document on colonialism and segregation. Is South Africa a neo-colonial state or a settler colonial state? On the issue of political authority, an authority held by a group within a society that allows for the administration of public resources and implement policies for society. Political power is understood as the ability to shape and control the political behavior of others, to lead and guide their behaviors in the direction desired by that particular person or by that particular group or institution, wielding the political authority. Political power understood to describe a state wherein there is the capacity to influence or to condition or to mold and control human behavior for the accomplishment of national political objectives, such as the right to national sovereignty and self-determination. Given our historical background of annexation and Bourgeoisification of the African people, including what we envisage as the 5 aims and objectives of the PAC state, political power will then imply the government and the state's ability to pursue the national liberation struggle's objectives of and for the abolition of property relations, and the government through the state acting on behalf of the dispossessed and propertyless African workers and the entire people. The state's ability to reclaim and redirect land, ban, agriculture and other means of production to be under control and management of African workers and communities, so as to effect the desired social change and realization of national sovereignty and self-determination, describes what we believe or we can deem as a form of political power. Such political authority is fully exercised without prescription and directives by global capitalist countries and transnational countries. Now, that being understood, the current system lacks that particular political power. It's incapable to direct the society, right? It's incapable to influence the society. It's always been subjected to the dictates of global capitalist countries and transnational companies. One typical example, the issue of labor brokers. And I think at some point I tried to speak about the land issue and the constitution, right? The issue of labor brokers, there's no way that the government of this country can succeed to deal with the issue of labor brokers, purely because of the Constitution of South Africa enshrine the right to trade. And trade in the context of one selling a service, one buying a service. Right? And that's one of the basic constitutional arguments that says that in the adaptation of capitalism, what it did in 1996, it made it a point that certain aspects that will protect capitalist interests are enshrined in the constitution of the country. So that whatever that can be done in the future by whoever, right, those who may feel aggrieved, particularly white capitalists, have the right to take up anybody to the constitutional court. Right? Then that's what give, it's now how many months? 24 months that the issue of labor brokers, it has been fighting all over, now it's now dying. Simply because of the government of this country cannot ban. But it cannot ban simply because of the power of global capitalist countries they have and the transnational companies that they have to influence and direct the government of this particular country. Another nice example is that Eastern Cape is known as one of the biggest provinces where the manufacturing companies of cars is located. What would then happen if the South African government would ban labor brokers? That's what an example at the balance. These particular multinational companies will easily pick up everything that belongs to them and leave the country. And leave the country, then the country has high levels of unemployment. Now, what I'm trying to expose is that the South African government does not have any authority and power, right, to direct any affairs of the country. Yes, it may have some ability to formulate regulations, but at the later stage, I'm trying to deal with the issue of legislation in relation to political power. Now, political administration, implying public administration, referring to the structure such as parliament and other working agencies charged with the administration of government functions, and also, as defined, management of public programs, meaning translation of politics into the reality into the reality that citizens see on everyday basis. What reality do we see on everyday basis, right? IPAP, what I'm advancing, is that in 1996, what has emerged, right? The 1994 political dispensation, Parliament and those who form part of it assume political administration. And that's what they are able to do. But they don't possess any political power. Political power to determine and direct the affairs of the country without any form of either internal or external dictate. So that all that they do is political administration. And I think Achima Fletcher puts it nicely, that in an African country, there have never been any form of decolonization program. But what has only occurred is that a black face was replaced, a white face was replaced by what? By a black face. Whereas the state machinery remained as it was and continued to serve. So the state machinery by design, it was colonial and colonial based on capitalist interest. So the state machinery was the black middle class assumed office and continued administration of a system of the state. By its design, it was made to protect the interest and to perpetuate the state of servitude and plundering of African resources and exploitation of the African workers. And that particular pattern continued throughout the entire African continent. So we have Africa, what emerged in 1994? It just a black Comrade Bourgeois that assumed political administration. And up until today, they lack an ability to exercise any form of political power. Thereby, there have never been any transfer of political power in South Africa. Political power cannot be exercised without control over the means of production. It is interrelated. There have never been a country, there have never been a state where in that particular country a government is able to influence the state of affairs without a command and control over the means of production, right? And if there is, probably it would be interesting to know which country the government has never been lacks control over the means of production, but it has been able to exert influence and exercise authority upon the affairs of the country. Now, settler colonial government embraced advocacy, the master-race-based ideology, a racial belief system that was founded to serve as an instrument to justify exploitation and displacement of the indigenous people while serving and advancing the capitalist mode of production. My argument is that even when there was a settler colonialism, there was a racist system in the country. Right? The foundation, the base of that particular ideology of that particular state has been and continues, and even today, remains a capitalist mode of production. Now, racial oppression and exploitation was institutionalized, whether the African majority were subjugated as a nation, and emerging from the African people, it was an African industrial labor that was sourced and subjected to systematic exploitation. Now, during the epoch, not only of white supremacy, under political leadership of the National Party Dominion, but also an epoch of imperialism, observing the political, social, and economic developments across Africa and international. The founding president of the Pan-African Congress, Soweto, made the advance that, I quote, "We are seeing within our own day the second rape of Africa, a determined effort by imperialist powers to dig their claws deeper into the flesh of the screaming victim. But this time, the imperialism we see, it is not the naked, brutal, mercantile imperialism of the 17th and 18th century. It is more subtle one, financial and economic imperialism, under the guise of a tempting slogan, the development of backward areas and people. By that, captures nicely and precisely what and how the colonialism has been defined. in short, an indirect rule, economic rule, by imperialism or by imperialism, right? So as early as 1959, the basic document of the PAC says that, in as much as these colonialists are retreating, they are retreating, but they are not succumbing to what we demand. What they are doing, they are adapting themselves. He speaks about a determined effort by imperialist powers to dig their claws deeper. Now, you can speak about the experiences of Lumumba. You can speak about the experiences of Kwame Nkrumah, the overthrowals, and so forth. I mean, in the 80s, we can speak about Thomas Sankara. What are those particular occurrences, right? It clearly describes neocolonialism in interior details, right? That the system had to adapt itself. But even adapting itself from South Africa, right? Because of within the control over the means of production, right? What was engraved on it? It's white supremacy. So for you to fight white supremacy and not white capitalism is going to be very, very defective. Because of those who got control over the means of production are primarily white capitalists. Right? But its adoption, as Soweto puts it, its adoption in 1994, what white capitalists did allow accommodation of few black people to form part of, and that become your African comprador bourgeois, right? And what is neocolonialism? And how does neocolonialism occur? Neocolonialism, in most cases, and has been referred, is that there must be a section of natives, a section of the indigenous, who will collude and collaborate with imperialism by virtue of their own class interest. Right? And that's the state that we find ourselves in today in the country. Some will furthermore elucidate or explain the analysis that the old order is changing and is ushering in a new order. Neocolonialism is defined as a geopolitical practice of using capitalism, business globalization, and cultural imperialism to control a country in lieu of either direct military control or indirect political control and economic control. That is neocolonialism occurs as a form where imperialism entrenches its hegemony. Right? Throughout the whole process, imperialism will seek to entrench its own hegemony. However, it will always find ways of how to adapt itself. And in South Africa, as I've stated, in terms of inclusion and accommodation of an African comprador bourgeois within the system itself, right, gave rise to neocolonialism. But at the same time, engraved within the very same capitalist system is the control of white capitalists, control over the means of production. Right? Now, what we then have, contrary to other African countries, you don't have neocolonialism as pure as understood in other countries. So you've got a trend of the mixture of still you've got a presence, high presence of settler colonialism, and at the same time you've got a presence of neocolonialism in the social structure of the country. Now the global dominant mode of production has defined and located Africa's economies and politics to be in such a manner that the political administration of the state machinery is subjected to the influence and direction of the dictum of imperialism, thus effectively rendering a multi-party democracy and political state control to be a meaningless political practice incapable of effecting any form of social transformation. Typical example is that the 1993 political settlement failed to focus itself on resolution of fundamental aspects which constituted the basis of the national struggle, namely the factors of political economic development, such as one, land ownership, which still more than 80% is controlled by white monopoly and foreign capitalist forces. And whilst the African majority have less than 13% of the unproductive land, two, more than 90% of the means of production are controlled by the local white capitalists and foreign capitalists, with a sprinkle of a few African comprador bourgeois, such as your Motsepe, Tokyo, Ramaphosa, and Tokyo Squad, and others. Three, the vast majority of the African labor force is unskilled, illiterate, and without quality basic education. For food, health, and education has been commodified, thus excluding the vast majority and access to basic human needs, thus creating a state of not only servitude but primarily that of dependence. Actually, the term of neocolonialism is associated, has been coined by Kwame Nkrumah, where Nkrumah's theoretical postulate and description of neocolonialism as a social, economic, and political control that is exercised economically, exercised linguistically, and culturally, facilitating assimilation of the colonized people, and thus opens the national economy to multinational cooperation of the neo-colonial country. The assertion is premised on the observation that those political independence of African states and other former colonized countries globally, decolonization was reduced to be a mere replacement of a colonialist white face and bodies as administrators by former colonized people, commonly national middle class and national petty bourgeois, including the aspirant national bourgeoisie, who assume political administration role of the system without any form of political authority to make any form of fundamental change. The decolonized states continued with existing international and domestic economic structural design of the society, or of the former central colonialist and colony countries, thus sustained capitalist economic control and domination. The sustained or preserved colonial economic control paved space for multinational companies to continue plundering of Africa's natural resources and exploitation of the African labor, thus undermining the envisaged objectives of the oppressed and exploited African to realize the right to national self-determination and sovereignty. Some post-independent African countries which produce goods and products for international markets, which by design were mainly based in Europe and America. These countries were deprived access to sell their products based on their own terms, but were subjected to great formula of imperialist economic domination of single market, wherein conditions of pricing and value were imposed and fixed, leading to the collapse of domestic economies. The collapse of the Zambian copper industry in the 1960s and the current Mali cotton industry situation, where they have been deprived expansion capability and access to markets since they threaten the American states, which are highly subsidized cotton producers, lead to the collapse of the local African producers and the loss of the manufacturing and production capabilities, such as the related knowledge and skill system, leading to dependency on foreign aid and funding, thus the rise of servitude in the form of poverty and underemployment and underdevelopment. Conclusions. South Africa as it stands, the ownership and control of land, agriculture, and other means of production is still under white minority capitalism with foreign capitalism. And included is a sprinkle of a few comrade African bourgeoisie. Majority of mines are foreign controlled and also the banks. Thus the dominance and influence of international capital over the state confirms what one writer noted about the South African Constitution. This researcher argued, I quote, there is a fundamental contradiction in the South African Constitution. Constitution commitment to fundamental land redistribution to the dispossessed, while at the same time protecting existing property rights. Thus, close quotes, thus South Africa has both neo-colonial features and also socially engraved features of settler colonialism, both existing on a capitalist mode of production. While colonialism and apartheid systematically undermined African agriculture, while farmers, on the other hand, benefited from substantial state subsidies. At the time of writing, there were 50,000 white commercial farmers in South Africa, while with varying degrees of concentration of landholding. These are the major beneficiaries of the past apartheid policies, and their continued control over the vast expenses of South African arable land lies at the heart of the enduring African exclusion and deprivation. Apart from the state subsidies, white capitalist agriculture has flourished as a result of the availability of a captured cheap African labor. That is, according to Mafeje in 1988. It was 1998. There are two judges who seem to perfectly understand or understood that transformation in terms of property rights and redressing the imbalances caused by colonialism and apartheid were not likely to be possible if existing property rights were recognized and retrenched. So the Constitution of South Africa retrenched, protected property rights, accumulation, and entrenchment. For the National Party, the other main party in the political negotiation process, 1992 to 1994, the inclusion of property clause in the Constitution and crucial, the protection of existing property rights were critical. They were intent on ensuring that the property of existing white owners will not only be jeopardized in a future democratic dispensation, argued by Chakanson. In the end, the National Party won the struggle to have the property clause entrenched in the interim constitution, with all the implications towards recognizing existing rights. That has been alluded by Mbisile Nzabeza. However, not only did the South African Constitution protect white minority and capitalist class interests and privileges, such as land accumulated since 1652, 1910, 1948. With capitalist economic domination and white supremacy interests being intertwined and highly ingrained in the social relations in the South African society. The South African 1996 Constitution entrenched capitalist domination with white supremacy. In those particular arguments, what I'm advancing is that our experience, we cannot purely argue on an absolute terms that we're a pure colonial state or center colonial state. What we see is that the patterns where the two are ingrained and the two are prevalent. South Africa is highly and indirectly influenced by foreign capital. Yes, you may have your own democracy, but the current government, in the Parliament of South Africa, we are just administrators who lack the political power. Right? We lack political power because we don't have control over the means of production, such that we can fully direct the affairs and the policy processes towards national sovereignty and national self-determination. I gave an example about the situation of Mali. The situation of Mali cotton producers is that with the WTO agreement, right, as part of the imperialist system, they have been deterred and discouraged to sell their products in countries like America, purely because of they possess an ability to lead to the collapse of the American cotton producers. They cannot compete with them. So the American cotton producers have been subsidized by the state, they have been protected by the state, and what then become the consequence of the Mali cotton producers. And also that the very fact that even the Mali government lacks political power, for they don't have control over the means of production. They lack the authority to, on equal terms, challenge the American government. Right? They are always subjected to the influence and direction of the both imperialist forces in imperialist countries represented by America and Britain. Right? Therefore, it cannot be argued that South Africa, by and large, has entered into a phase of being a neo-colonial state, with, yes, a large presence of white supremacy and domination by virtue of a white having control over the means of production. Isn't it?
Yeah, Africa.
Africa Kuruma presentation. Africa, we are still going to discuss, but I wanted the second speaker to also come so that we told the two views. I think Africa Kuruma, you are toning down. So it means this debate has held. Because Africa Kuruma was just lambasting that South Africa is neo-colonial. Now I'm hearing a little bit of toning down. You correct me if I'm wrong. So, yeah, no, this debate is helping. Africa wanted I know you are looking for a PAC political school. I think you have found it here. Don't go around looking for a certain building that the PAC will have a political school. This is it, my friend. You can utilize this particular little resources, creativity of Africa. I don't know what a political school means, but I see it's happening here. Africa, kikiwata acknowledge the presence ya Africa Mshope, Africa Government Soweto. Africa Mshope is part of the National Executive Committee of the PAC. Africa, you are all important. I'm just highlighting that we also have the national leadership amongst ourselves. Kaufela amugetswe ke bona mama mo le ka skipa ra le boa o tlile mama le boa ho wa bona Africa wa PAC tshwaetso ba one, you know, and I hope we learn that we need to involve the community. Ya bona mama o wa pere skipa sa Soweto electricity crisis committee. So we need to work the community. This can't isolate her too much. So mama ritobuwa likanto za prepaid. How no meeting or wrong, no meeting all right. Yeah. So
yeah, I don't know, maybe like, because I see Africa ONC is also carrying more pages than this.
Yes.
Maybe, well, I don't know, because by the time we finish, maybe we will be lost, you know, on the points. I don't know, like, how long, but I'm a bit worried. I see lots of pages.
Yeah.
I don't know. Whether it's going to read way to way.
No, Africans also summarize. I know Africans also summarize.
Because we started around of password.
Yeah, but that is the point, Africa. Because I don't want people to engage African Kuruma and then leave. I want people to also hear African tea. That's why I need again the basis is Tataso. Because there's a tendency that will engage African Kuruma for a long time and forget African tea. Please, Africa, with your indulgence. Africa, then let's hear Africa and see. As I recall, he was saying South Africa is a settler colonial state, so I'm not sure if it has changed.
What would it? What settler?
Yeah, no. At least take Africa, Kenya, Africa, as Africa, actually, earlier it was outright a new colonial state. Now, Africa, it is both a settler colonial state and a new colonial state. Topic here, the importance here, firstly, the importance here, this topic, we must define the target of our revolution. The intention of the topic, of course, is to turn the PAC in the true sense, as Tony Aguilera. Right now, the PAC should be the school of revolution. So, my approach to 1994 elections represented the end of forced legal division of people by the color of their skin, leaving intact equally rigid division of people by economic means in 1994. But now, from the party, PAC is the most scientific party. I understand PAC. And PAC is Marxist. But PAC has a Marxist or has a socialist. PAC simply understand. PAC, the leaders, the leaders of the PAC from inception. Answering first, Mafrik, if we can have this and return this basic document into our little red book, now it is black. You see? You see, people want to differentiate the Ainstar PAC from the speeches of Soweto. The PAC has adopted the speech, that is why it is part of the basic document. The speeches of Soweto became the PAC thought. It's part of the PAC thought. So they are inherent in the outlook of PAC. So we separate and really treat them differently. So in analyzing this, now I'm moving from this, using these speeches. Of course, it is very difficult to say how can every Africanist, how Mozart, what kind of a state is South Africa? They say it's a neo-colonial, it's a secular colonial, it is both. But now, when we look at, actually PAC is scientific from its formation. If you look at the Pan-Africanist Manifesto, reading the preamble of the Pan-Africanist Manifesto, and or read the Capital, Marx, for Bao, who read Marx, Africa, you read Marx. Bao read Marx, Bao sheba more the origins or the beginning in the industrialization, more chapter ya Marx, volume 1, Capital, page 702. So, more, how check out the Pan-Africanist Manifesto? It analyzes the origins of our problems as expansion of European colonial markets. That's where, which is scientific. The PAC has used both historical materialism and dialectics in analyzing the South African situation. That is why the PAC is the most scientific organization. Now, check the evolution of South African society, because we must use also historical materialism and analyze the evolution of South African society. We know that, and Nkrumah has already explained, Cabo Jan van Riebeck, the first station, the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company, both which led the establishment of the first station in our country. But I would not talk about all the historical facets, but it led until Anglo-Boer War. After Anglo-Boer War, we know that our country was divided into 4 colonies, both British and the Boer colonies, the 4 republics, what they call the republics. Then in after the peace treaty, or after Anglo-Boer War of 1989, then those republics were brought together. A national, what they call the National Convention, 1908. The National Convention of 1908 led to the Union of South Africa. And the Union of South Africa, was the union of the British and the Afrikaners. Which of course, if you go to the American Oxford Dictionary, it tells you a South African is a person of European origin. In that explanation, because it was created for them. On the other hand, what they did, they created the native reserves
Aba created native reserves for us, where they located as only 7% of the land, and then now in that 7%, they regarded those native reserves as labor reserves. So now we are just only to be laborers. Now, to understand PAC scientific, then Pukela says the national and class factor are intertwined, are inseparable. You see? So that is Pukela understanding that question here, Runa we attend into being laborers in our own land. So having been turned into laborers, not having any land, even in the now, however, those reserves, we know that those reserves determine into these the townships as part of labor camps. Now, because they were labor camps, they were not supposed to be developed with any infrastructure properly, because those were impermanent structures. So they were labor reserves. Until 1936, when they said they were adding another 7% when they were removing the colored people from voters' roll in the Western Cape. But in the very 7%, 6% by it never came fair, because even in the process, there were expropriation in the very same areas. So ultimately, Africans became landless. So now, three types of colonialism. The colonialism practiced by the French, assimilation. Colonialism practiced by Britain, indirect rule. And then also Britain also developed another one, a secular colonialism, where now a foreign minority or the settlers came to colonize and settle, as opposed to other areas where the indirect rule, where the colonizers sent their governors. So this time, the oppressors or the colonizers settled in our own country, and then they own our own country. So we are completely dispossessed. It's one of Zimbabwe, secular colonialism. So hence, how to check in this document, how check the PAC case, more in this document. More PAC case, more PAC case, or internally, okay. Let me begin by saying that we are quite aware of the fact that we are faced with an overwhelming combination of forces internally, in the persons of white ruling minority, and externally in the person of forces of Western capitalism and international imperialism. So both now questionnaire capitalism, the imperialism. Inside, so but it described very well at that time. We identify the forces. Hence now, if having identified the forces, aiming the target, revolution, so the PAC have identified those targets. Now, in its aim, now, in towards realizing its objective, hence the 5 aims of the PAC, in order to realize that, the first thing was to rally and unite the African people, having recognized the question that we were colonized and dispossessed as African people. And hence we were rallying as a process towards achieving the objective. We must rally the African people. But understanding that key to that, again, they have already identified the targets. But the motive force for that, that's why barring the illiterate and the semi-illiterates are the key and the core and the cornerstone of our struggle. So that is, those are the workers and peasants become the key in addressing this question. So now, number 2, of course, is overthrow of white domination and establish that African national self-determination. Number 3, of course, to strive to address the economic question, the establishment of an Africanist socialist democracy. Of course, projection of the African personality or the advancement of the economic and cultural advancement of the African people and unifying the continent. These as the aims. And now, having said that, when I read this statement like apartheid cannot be reformed, it must be destroyed. So now we said we should also look at the speeches Soweto. So Soweto speeches, if we check when he was analyzing the situation, the ANC on the other hand, because if Mona, by 1959, Soweto said they are no longer in the ranks of the liberation movement. So by that, and if Rekota this manifesto clearly, in determining the current situation, with following the capture of a portion of the black leadership of South Africa by a section of leadership of white ruling class, the masses of our people are in extreme danger of being deceived into losing sight of the objective of our struggle. This captured black leadership claims to be fighting for freedom, where in truth it is fighting to perpetuate the tutelage of the African people. It is tooth and nail against the African gaining the effective control of their own country. It is fighting for the maintenance of the status quo. It is fighting for the constitutional guarantees or national rights for our alien nationals. It has completely abandoned the objective of freedom. It has joined the ranks of the reactionary forces. It is no longer within the ranks of the liberation movement. That was in 1959. Because having analyzed when they were saying our struggle is a civil struggle, that the land belongs to all who live in it, ignoring the historical fact. So, have identified that as early as that. Now, in the evolution, the current South African situation, as to what has happened, we know the events. Magungu were planning for this kind of situation. I may just quote, when they were building this kind of society, by 1983, they came up with tricameral parliament, where they included the so-called colored and the Indians into their parliament, and they left the indigenous people. And after 1985, when it was very hot, Cabo state of emergency, it was very hot at that time. now they were building towards creating the buffer, so the buffer states or the buffers by co-opting some of our people more. Pimvili more, they created those selection park as a buffer. They created a college. Develop the black middle class in order to be the buffer. So they created the nail was created. Kiwana Maburu now who loan some Africans to be called. They started but now in that time also who started it is when Mandela started the process of negotiation. And on the other hand, they also started if you remember when the white business go Dakar, go Miles Park in creating this. And also in 1988, when the Soviet Union a conference in the Africanist Soviets go Germany, because by that time it was when Soviet Union also was moving along this line, glasnost and perestroika. It was now moving along that line, who were accommodated. So it was for that conference. It is where they shaped the NC to come also, because in any so it shaped them preparing for New South Africa. Leading until, of course, there were the negotiations at the back, there were agreements at the back, and those agreements, it's all that led to shaping of New South Africa today until 1994, which of course agreements were done behind. If you look at what they call TRC, our struggle began at 1960, because if we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was to solve problem struggle to 1960 up until 1990, when there was conflict, which of course disregarded the actual fact the land and its resources and complete liberation of our country. So that's how New South Africa was created. Remember, Inelibo Cyril Ramaphosa, who were at the negotiating table, and then Cyril Ramaphosa were given monies for letting South Africa where it is. Mandela and all were given that. You remember when Standard Bank gave Cyril Ramaphosa the loans, they gave their company monies in order to build the so-called black middle class, or the very black bourgeois, so that Oppenheimer, remember, we cannot be led by people who do not have money. They can betray us, whom we do not share the same interest. The Blue Valley, all of them were given those chances. But of course, they ensured that the PAC, because of its correctness, should not leave the country. So, if we look at this situation, it is of course very difficult to declare, because now we knew that our fight was to overthrow the secular colonial state, and that has never been overthrown. And what has happened was a nuance, Boer and African Petit Bourgeois collision that has happened in 1994. It changed the appearance, but the form remained the same. The content remained the same. So, we never decolonized. But of course, yes, like Soweto, people are captured. And of course, they were moving, who created, who maintained the status quo. They were co-opted and they were given lots of money so that they become the buffer. If, for instance, you know that the non-min mine, the owner, Queen Elizabeth, has got a lot of shares in Lonmin. Elizabeth has got a lot of shares in Barclays Bank and in ABSA now. Barclays Bank is at 60%. So all those imperialists are now owning. They are owning the country. So the targets become imperialism and capitalism. Of course, we know that in the eyes of the people, as of now, we may not be able to, if recently the masses will not be able to identify the targets that the revolution to change. Because on the other hand, they are using even Bokosatu, last Kosatu strike, just to maintain Batu, to control Batu next to them, so that people should not revolt. But the key question, the contradiction, is against capitalism and imperialism. Now, if really what must be done, it is that we must bring the PAC, both ideologically, politically, and organizational, to be the tool for the second liberation of the continent. So that is the key question now. And now we must really build and turn the PAC into a school of revolution, so that we can be able to address the problems that are affecting our people. The simple thing, how there, it still shows that renal fats, you have seen when but that also represents the contradictions that are happening in the ruling party. Because when we look at Marikana symbolizes Cyril. And the way these are buffers, if you saw the way the situation developed in Marikana, it was when Cyril wrote a letter, I don't know, those workers, it's a criminal act, are writing at the same managers. Because those are being owned. And then now what they did, they exposed the very letter, because we shouldn't see who is behind, who's owning our minds. They had to expose Cyril, because he was already buff. That's why Cyril was opposed, or was exposed more. But it's a reflection also of the contradiction in the ANC. The same way, liberal AI and Asia, it reflects the contradictions. Now, where does Tokyo stand? Because housing and settlement, here Tokyo. So those are the contradictions that are happening. But now, if imperialism or it has also given, in order to give this buffer. If you have a royal Mafuke, who are owning the platinums, Rebona Hainka, the very character, because it corrupt and it buys but re bona ha re bona mo Zuma o bona mo exact wo Mabuto Sese Seko where o bona motho hang a banker mole in his own country na utshaba eng ha di banker there because ke yona system ya corruption ya hore the resources are still in the hands of those, both the internal settlers and the imperialists are owning the resources of our country. So in the characteristics as the characteristics also, if we can in simple terms, the characteristics of neo-colonialism, debating in terms of create the puppet or continue the tutelage, but Rona Zangre overthrow secular colonialism, and Bukela said apartheid cannot be reformed; it must be destroyed completely, and it was not destroyed. It was reformed if we want to. So that presents challenge for us. But challenge for us is to build PAC into a strong revolutionary party where it belongs. And the challenge is, say, we know that there are squabbles in the PAC, we know that. And those squabbles, it's already found the imperialist challenge. It is for us now, because many people have sacrificed for the PAC, and because of its correctness, it is now, for now we must really stand again and defend the legacy of Sobuk by correcting the PAC and by taking over power, because ours was the seizure of the state political power and nothing more, and retransform this. But it is important to reunify the other revolutionary Pan-Africanists outside to turn things around. We must also understand what is happening. Those, for instance, okay, right, we recognize that there are people in council, there are what, we must understand how those things work. We talk on bitter, all of them in their own games. So the PAC must be corrected. If
siyabonga Africa mani yenze isikhathi ukuthi nize la nizosibona. Siyabonga kakhulu. Africa, as I said, we have also the leadership in the NEC, which is here, and in our midst we also have the national organizer of the PAC. Now, Africa, I think you understand as a national, former national organizer, what does the word national mean? It means you are not based in PV, you are not based in a particular region. You have to move around. And I've come to understand that Africa 1D is also organizing national. So I think he will not stay for long with us in terms of his commitments to other party programs. But I wanted him to come to the front and to give us the latest developments of the party. What is currently happening in the PAC, and what are the important dates in the PAC that we can follow. And I'll allow Africa One, with your indulgence, just 2 minutes to open to the House so that Africa would say some of the announcements that you are going to make. Let's welcome Africa One.
It's late. Yeah. You are abusing your authority today. I was not supposed to speak. Now, Africa is dealing with me. First, he today.
One of them is my student from Soweto High. We are trying to revive PAC. We are trying to go back to the basics. Mama, I'm acknowledging your presence. And he even said comrades who came all the way from Limpopo, the community from Limpopo. I was on a Skype. No. Your presence is appreciated. You may say the members of this organization, the owners of this party, the ordinary pension members. You may say comrades who are in the defense force, general politics commands the gun. That's why I put that down. No, comrades, what Club Spirit PV branch has started is very, very noble. I think we lost somewhere when we started stopping classes and workshops of this nature. That's why today we are talking past each other. The PAC message is not coherent. The PAC message is not the same. You hear PAC leader who are and it becomes very, very worrying. We are something totally different because we no longer have this kind of classes that we used to have in the past. And I'm saying, let's use this as a catalyst to have those classes all over. I started with students there, but because of my work schedule, namely weekend we are not continuing in that 3 weeks or so another month. So in Cuba, especially from General CI, you have, I know you've got a pool of commissariat, but you are not availing them to us as an organization. The reason why we are in this state is because we have allowed our people just to lie idle when we were frustrated. So my plea, comrades, is that the core, then Azan, the core of Abraham reference, and the core of us when really avail those skills that you have, avail your time. Because next year, but I'll line up a whole lot of programs for the high schools, especially starting from the basics. So, especially in that, I'm going to meet with principals of high schools there, seeking permission, requesting permission to conduct these classes on a weekly basis. And now I don't think Baba to have. So people go out and then they are because I can't do that. I'm running all over the country trying to resuscitate PAC structures. But what I can report is that things are beginning to take shape, although it's painful. It's a painful exercise that we are doing, but hopefully with the commitment of PAC members we will get this right. Because whether the PAC is going to take shape and reassemble Batlante, it will be because of new members. A vigilant and critical thinking membership is key. If we don't do that, this party will be hijacked. Because we are seeing there are measures of movements going to that particular direction. Where in the past, when I joined this PAC, when I was a 16-year-old, it was what brought us to it because we were very young was PAC members were thinkers. They'll critique every little thing, they debate issues. But of late, we're not saying we don't want numbers, but of late, that critical thinking is beginning to lack. And hard to mean the party one day I'll image somewhere. Because we don't even have a vetting process. We don't even vet people. The person will just imagine at the Congress because they are the past seat there.
and lead the PAC and take it somewhere else. I'm saying to delegates, no, as the PAC, we are pro-capitalist. And because those people don't know the difference between capitalism, socialism, and all this, yes. And it will emerge from the Congress to say, hey, because it is happening in Africa. Last week I was in the regional Congress of Bembe. There were 81 delegates. Today, comrades here in Johannesburg are meeting. Johannesburg, according to stats, is the most populous metropole in the country. Now I'm told that people are meeting, convening a congress, and there are 15 delegates. Now it's very painful. It's very painful. And despite our attempts and to send people, because some of the comrades felt that I, as the national organizer, is conflicted. I then said, comrades from Johannesburg, can you make means to meet with these comrades? They met despite my pleas with them, because I met them one-on-one, some of them. Met Malinga Blackie on the sidelines of the net workshop, and I said, I tried to convince him, comrade, we need to move means. This thing of having the factions and all that, small groupings belonging to a particular individual. But these things are a manifestation of a power play. Because people want to establish fiefdoms within the PAC. And now, when we want to do the right things and want to bring everybody forward to the PAC, when we then become to threaten their hegemony. Understand? And the unfortunate part is this thing that some senior party leaders are involved in this whole mess, because it becomes a circus. If the most popular region, even when there is that side of Janelle and all those other leaders, if a rural region can put in one delegate, and then the region where we believe should become the heartbeat of the PAC in terms of industrialization, in terms of numbers, in terms of everything, then it pulls 15 delegates. Then it's cause for concern. But people will okay it. They will okay it because they want to maintain their grip and power. Power that they believe they have. But I'm just saying, going forward, it's up to you as members of this organization to save it. Because I, as an individual, I can be the national organizer, I can't save it. It's members of this organization who need to stand up and say, hey, enough is enough. Because the power rests with you. The power does not rest with the ANC. The power rests with you as branches, as members of the organization. And I'm pleading with you, save this organization. Save this organization from people who want to use it for their personal interest. But we are continuing with programs. Next year, Congress is going to be a year of action. Next year is the 100th anniversary of the Land of 1918. And if we need to be taken seriously as the PAC, we should begin having programs to correct the wrongs that came about because of the Land of 1918. And correcting those wrongs is a radical approach. The radical approach will mean giving the African people land. We need to do that. We need to be on the forefront of that, of giving the African people land. We need to do massive programs. But without proper structures, the reason why we said to comrades here who convened that circus called the Congress, that comrade, wait. Because the kind of programs that we want to embark on will need structures. I normally say to people, structures give us organizational guarantees that if we take a resolution today, that tomorrow we will be going to paving around here, removing prepaid meters. It will mean we've got structures of it. We are sure. Otherwise, we will take resolutions and they just become that useless. They become hollow because we can't implement them. But structures then begin to give those organizational guarantees to say, if I go tomorrow and I pick up the phone and say, Mafrica in Johannesburg, this is the program for next week, we need to do that. Because there are structures, solid and vibrant structures on the ground. That particular directive or that particular resolution will be out. As of now, we can't guarantee. Even now, the intention is that next year we need to massive rolling programs. But without getting that right kind of structures, we risk making ourselves a laughing stock. But we must not, because we are few and we scared of embarking on actions. The problems that is facing us as the PACs today is that the fear of failure. And people need to remember that the very first time a child takes a step, we all applaud. But the second step, that child will fall. But it don't stop the child from continuing to try to walk. And we need that the belief that is there in an infant to say, I can walk, despite knowing that I fall. We need to fall 1,000 times, but the important thing is that we need to wake up every time and continue. So I'm saying, next year, Congress, whether we return or not, we need to back all those programs. But we need to build structures. Let's build structures for next year, because people are saying the PAC is not visible. Yes, it's not visible because we don't have structures in place, or even if we have structures, they are weak. Now, let's build those structures. We must not say we are going on holiday. I fought with you yesterday to say, Comrade, you must be available. And I don't believe in this business of holidays. The struggle does not have holidays. So we must continue. You understand? So, Mafrica, I don't have much. It has been a long day. That's that. But let's continue to work. Let's not allow those minor distractions, because I believe they are minor distractions. I've got all our faith in PAC members. Maybe that faith is for that teachers to say members of the PAC is an organization. And therefore, I'm saying to you, all these minor issues, all these side shows created by Congress, we are going to defeat them because they represent a particular class agenda. And that class agenda, we're going to crush it as members of this organization. Easily.
Mafrica, I'll just give you 2 minutes just to engage the national organizer on what he has said. Mafrica, you want to engage?
Yeah, just pose one question for Pierre.
Okay, yeah, okay, you can come.
Okay. Yeah, you see what I wanted to find out, taking into account the radical programs that Africa has elaborated on. One thing that disturbs me is that within the PAC now, they seem to be lacking of, because radical programs, you need a radical organization, you need, and I for one, I don't believe that the parliamentary politics can come up with revolutionary ideas, because you need to debate, go through consultation and all that, the same as 1930, for me it's more of a, we should look beyond that, because most of the land that was taken after 1913 is the most infertile. The Anglo-American, the Sikukuni land, all those things were taken before that. So I think we should be the starting point. But however, one thing that disturbs me is that when PAC, maybe the vision, looking forward, how do they envisage carrying out all those programs? Because as we said, Africa is put it we are entangled by WTO, IMF, and being in the parliamentary politics constrain us. And it becomes difficult to move out of that pyramid circle, other than being in a revolutionary process, So for me, there's always been this true line that which way do you go? Do you go the revolutionary one, or do you go the parliamentary system? And the parliamentary system, and most of the time, we end up owning the Marikana. PAC kill the people in Marikana. PAC take out the people in lands because they're in parliament. You cannot, therefore, PAC walks out of parliament and say it is the ANC because they are part of that. So therefore, the way forward that I want to know, the PAC is also collaborating into one government with the charterists, with the settlers.
Let's park that issue. That's why we are here.
You see, can I conclude? No, I'm giving it shape, I'm concluding.
No, we are out of order. We can't pin down the national organizer. That discussion is coming. And he's not the messiah of the
Suppressing
PAC.
the community. You know why I'm asking such questions?
No, I won't allow you.
You know why I'm asking such
I won't allow
questions? It is
you.
difficult.
No, I won't allow him.
For my Africa said
you're out of order. You're out of order.
PAC
No, you're out of order, Africa. You're out of order.
But can we think?
If you want to continue sitting in this meeting, you just stop. Because we can't, we can't bring down one on policy matters. We are the ones who are going to deal with policy. No, I'm not going to.
We are no longer thinking.
No.
He said we are no longer thinking. And I think it's true.
You don't have to answer. Because this is the purpose of the workshop, to discuss that.
Yes,
and we're not pin down one.
You'll be confronted by those when you go outside. When you go outside, you're confronted by the same questions that I'm raising. We need to tackle them here.
It is related to sorry for the frustration. Normally, I don't want people to leave meetings of the PAC being very frustrated, because otherwise they take their anger outside. I think we need to address that. At one stage, if I remember correctly,
Can you finish?
Yes, yeah.
Can you finish?
You know why, Tony? Like, there's certain things that maybe I'm saying is the PAC, we need to scrutinize and ask ourselves questions. Like, for example, people will say to us, there are certain things, if I may play the devil's advocate, somebody will say there are more middle class, there's more people with cars, there's more houses and all that. So what is the relevance of the PAC? Those are questions that we need to ask. If someone is saying, I'm trying to liberate a guy who lives in Soweto, the affluencer, and he says, you're liberating me with what? Because I've already achieved 294. Those are questions that we need so that we spread. You can only be stronger when you ask critique questions that are unnecessary to make us stronger. But to say that we are all, we must sing Bumaya, we're all going together, we are all free, we are all Pan-Africanists, it doesn't help us. That's why, as we say as Africanists, we also need to read even books that critiques us as capitalists and all that, so that when I'm coming out here, I'm confronted by such questions, I'm able to answer. But to say I can't ask such questions, it becomes a problem. Because somebody will say to me as I go outside and say, but you kill people in Madrid, it's your government. You voted for it in 94. Because democracy operates like that. You don't say because you're a minority, then the decision is not binding on you. Those are relevant questions that you need to answer. Same as COSATU. PAC operates, is in alliance like COSATU in government.
No, thanks. I think the question that I posed by colleagues are not necessarily directed to me. Yes. They are just, we need to start talking about these things. To say, how do we then begin to move forward? Now, my apology for the chair. The chair is very strong for school character. We don't want to suppress people in PAC meetings, and we must not be very hard. People must speak, even if they are posing very hard questions. Because it's for us to answer them. And we need to, you are right, we need to start to read even African literature. You can understand African. Because one thing general, after a whole lot of this was that they fighting with the Arabs, he wrote a book with all the battle maneuvers and formation that conducted when he routed the Arab armies. Now he said, if a war can start again, and I'm still the general, I'm going to use the basic tactics. And because the Arabs wanted anything Jewish, was started, the general was still there. The book was published, it was in books. He developed the same formation, it's a true story. Same formation, it was still the general. And textbook style, routed. So I'm saying we need to read everything. Even if we see something of the ANC, we must say, Chatarist propaganda. We must read it. And he will understand what they are thinking. Now, comrade, if my memory serves me well, the decision to participate in parliamentary politics was taken by you members of the PAC. And if you, as members of this PAC, you need to revisit that. To say, but this participation in parliamentary politics, because it was a resolution taken by members of this PAC. This parliamentary politics is constraining us. It makes us to lose focus. These are some of the things that we need to begin to discuss, to say, but what are the pros of participating in this parliamentary politics? What are the cons? What are the disadvantages of that? But what we need to do, seizing state power is not just a simple exercise. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt participated in a shame of parliamentary politics under Mubarak. Who was there before Mubarak? Was it Sadat? Couldn't assist me as well here. Sadat, they've been there, they were marginalized. But they bide their time. Hamas was a very insignificant role player in Palestinian politics. But what Hamas did, they started putting their tentacles in community structures. Literally, they were running schools. Every community or upliftment project was run by Hamas. The Fatah faction was there, genuine to do that, but it was recognized as the genuine illegal. But what we need to do in Africa was, if we want to seize state power, what we need to do, we need to be in every part of society. We need to be there in the labor movement. We need to be there in the army. We need to be there in civil society formations. We need to be everywhere. We need to infiltrate, because we are at war. We are at war, and it's not a simple case of we can't be part of it. Because we will see state power one day, and we will call all these European consultants, like the ANC did, to come and assist us. So when we are talking about these things, we need to be careful, and we need to use lateral thinking to say, but concrete. Because we need to know what people are doing in a particular government department. Do we have people there? Don't. Do we have people in the National Department of Health? No, we don't. Do we have people in any other government departments? We don't. Even if we are there, how do we then best utilize them? I'm just saying, for now, we don't have a position in terms of going out of parliamentary politics in answering to you. But as PAC members, at the upcoming policy conference or annual national conference, we need to start asking those difficult questions. Until such time that we change that particular resolution, it remains stinging and it remains binding on us, with all its attendant disadvantages and advantages. One will advocate for it to say this is what the majority of our people who we are claiming to represent, the poorest of the poor, they go and vote the ANC. It's a mandate that they've given, and that is their wish. Now we need to start beginning to talk to say, but how do we then begin to conscientize? Because the ANC is thriving because the masses of our people are gathering. And as the PAC, what is our role in conscientizing them? What must we begin to do in conscientizing them so that they begin to reject? You are right. You will never have heard that something that was taken at the battlefield will be retained by a ballot box. I can't hear it. I mean, we are just fooling ourselves. If we are serious about our Azania, the envisaged Azania, as envisaged by the PAC, we know for a fact that I can't give you a car through the barrel of a gun, and then from there, and say, go and vote, there's an election there. Go and vote with your family, I bring my friends, and we vote whether the car must be taken. Because I've got a lot of people who are benefiting from this car, and they'll come and vote, and you won't get your car. You don't have a car, you don't have prestige, you don't have stature in society. Why must people side with you? They must side with you because I've got your car, I've got resources. And this is what is happening. We will never see our Azania to be good. It's true. And we need to start beginning to talk about that. Thanks.
Comrades, I'm not trying to be dictatorial, but the national organizer has indicated that he's going somewhere. So I thought that we are going to entertain more or less the announcements that he has made, and then we excuse him. But my apologies, Mafrika, if my behavior was untoward. But Mafrika, is there anything around the particular announcements that the national organizer has made so that he can be released? But as he has indicated also, it is up to us as members of the PAC to really come with a policy direction. At some point at the national conference level, we need to say which direction, even ideological in Africa. We are the owners of this organization. So we need to really chart our way forward as PAC members. So Mafrika Wandi, you can join us in the deliberations if you still have time. But Mafrika, I also want to acknowledge the presence of Mafrika Andy Swamjani, who is the current Secretary for Publicity and Information. Mafrika, you are welcome.
Thank you, Mafrika. I'd like to apologize. It is very disrespectful to be late in the workshop, but I had a problem with my car. I hope you'll accept my apology.
No, if it was the question on the issue of national finance.
I did not see a hand, Mafrika.
No, my hand is with me.
Oh, okay, you can come.
No, around the issues of the announcements, because National Organizer have said that there is a Congress, the so-called Congress, sitting in a certain corner in Alexandria. But fortunately enough, I see that there are 3 NEC members who are present with us in this gathering. So I want to get their feeling about that Congress. I wanted them to say if the Congress can be blessed by the National Executive Committee of the PAC or what. Because I really acknowledge their presence here.
Mafrika, do you want to make a follow-up on this question?
I don't know whether it's a. Let me say it's a comment. Let me say it's a comment. Comment I'm beginning to do. You see, if we're taking this direction, we'll end up losing the focus of everything that we came out from here. So I don't know. Comrade, I'm not also wanting to suppress your presentation. But comrades, I'm worried. My humble submission would be, if we don't have any other things that we want to pose to the comrade organizer, can we then focus on the presentation? Please.
No, thanks Mafrika for that. Mafrika, let's continue. I think the national organizer was clear on the question of what is happening today in Alexandria. I think it was very clear. And I think there's a scheduled meeting for the region on the weekend of the 8th and 9th, Comrade One. Yeah, so I think the memo will go out to members to forward that memo. Mafrika, let's continue with our discussion. Here's a question, Mafrika. Is South Africa a neo-colonial state, or is it still a settler colonial state? Africa Nkuruma is arguing that it's a combination of both. Africa has come with a phrase which says it's Anglo-Boer African bourgeois condition. Africa is what it's just a mixture of all kinds of foods. The same course. I'm not sure if we can define our state as some political poiki course. But Africa, that is the state. Can we engage the 2 speakers? On the one hand, Africa Nkuruma, and on the other hand, Africa Unsie an open for hands. Africa?
Okay. No, starting with Africa is also that Africa Nkuruma is started. No, one thing that out of his speech that emanated, what I wanted to find out, because he also mentioned the agrarian society. My understanding, I might be misinformed on that. It's more based on the land, agriculture, and all that, you know. Like what you've seen with the Chairman Mao did, you know, where for the because somebody, I'm asking it from a devil's advocate, because somebody will say to you, 49 people died when the Chairman Mao was moving from agriculture to industrialization. Why in the era where there's the IT technology and all those things, outer space technology, we've seen imperialists moving to Mars and all those things. Why would the PAC still wanna go back instead of maybe emulating like the Chinese, the Korean, the Asian, redefining themselves within the Western system and emerging with their own new concept? Why would they, not follow that? If someone would ask that. Then the piece, and also the definition whether we are in a colonial, settler state or neo-settler. My satisfaction would have been in if that definition is also coined with the way forward. Because for me, sitting here, I welcome the definitions and the differences. But however, I want to find how does it impact on me, on the moving forward. How does it shape me? Is it important for me whether it's a neo or a settler, as in direct, pure as it is? But how does it shape me moving forward from there? I would have loved to hear them elaborating on that. Because there was this thing that if we're in a settler colonialism, it means that the Charterists are also on that other side. And if we move them, it's one of those things that I wanted to find out from you.
Thanks, Mafrika. Is there any other question or comment, Mafrika? You want to comment? Mafrika,
thanks, Mr. Stalo. I don't think it's a question as such. It's more of a view that I have the debate itself. I think Azania is the best example of evolution of oppression. I think it underwent all these particular forms of oppression. It underwent classical colonial oppression, classical colonialism, British colonialism. As a consequence of Anglo-Boer War, it evolved to a settler colonial. As a consequence, of course, of the pressure that was put by the National Liberation Movement into the settler colonial regime, a number of its oppressive manifestations, your apartheid, your white supremacy, and so forth and so moving on, it evolved into a neo-colonial state that was a product of a negotiated settlement of Cadre and other things, and so forth and so forth. The point I want to make is that in a process as oppression has been evolving, as revolutionaries who have not been refreshing our ideas, as revolutionaries who have been stuck in I want to choose Asian Sylvester Henry Pan-Africanism. A very Sylvester Henry who might have not confronted settler colonialism, for an example, who might have not known that we might reach at some stage neo colonialism at some stage. We became stagnant in terms of refining our ideology as we confront the struggle itself. While oppression became a smart operator than we thought, it realized when it was under pressure, it evolved while it is still oppressing us. It evolved from one form to the other while keeping us in the very same oppression. And if you look very close in Nkrumah's not Raymond Kakuli Nkrumah's writings, confused on which Nkrumah were referring. I don't know whether it's original, which one is original, but I'm referring to the one of that. All Conakry writings of Nkrumah, in a way, should be able to give us a line, starting with, particularly the one just before the neo-colonialism, the highest form of capitalism, moving to the revolutionary part, the class struggle in Africa, African socialism revisited, and all the connected writings of Nkrumah might have been able to shed a light. Unfortunately, because of some form of, I think I will attribute it to conservatism on our side. We just wanted to be more revolutionary and to be ultra-leftist, and we never opened our eyes into an evolving oppression to an extent that up until today we are still debating whether it is settler colonial or neo-colonial. Mafrika will say it's bold. Mafrika came with a new one. Anglo, other things. But I believe that it is a new liberal. Science affair. It might have been different from other neo-colonial in Africa because of its lateness. No, Azania is a bit late in terms of number of things, it's independent and so forth. It might have been a bit late. That is why it is not purely appearing as a pure newer colonial like your Mobutu Congo would look like your, I want to be more controversial, like your Mugabe 1980-2000 Zimbabwe would look like. It has its own form on the basis of the fact that we might have been a bit late in terms of our strategy. Taking my view further, I would just say, as Africanists, I think it's as a result of various waves that as the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania we have taken. It was a period of close to 20 to 30 years when we were purely a Maoist organization. And of late, I think we've just degenerated to a pure neoliberal organization in a pure form of your DA and the ANC. Though we might not be saying it purely in our documents, but in practice, we tend to behave as such. And Mabra has been asking on how strategic is new parliamentary only route, new parliamentary alone route. How strategic is that? I want to also highlight the new parliamentary as the only route towards achieving socialism. That's why Africa is even asking some particular questions. Because of late, I think post 1990 moving this side, we have not purely defined ourselves as a socialist organization that we have been known for internationally. We have purely degenerated to something else that might even embarrass some if we can resurrect today. We are fighting, for an example, we are fighting over councillor seats, parliamentary seats, and etc., just to show what has become of us. We have become something that whatever we do has something to do with votes and nothing to do with the revolution. It's because of a new parliamentary only as the route towards achieving liberation of our people. Whatever we do, we say, how will it get us votes? We don't even forget that votes might not ever, I don't even think it will ever give us power. So that was my view. Thanks, Africa, before you suppress me.
There's a lot that Mafrika Vusi has said. Mafrika at one stage, Mafrika Vusi is saying we were pure Maoists. But I'm not sure which part of Mao did we take and which part did we relegate. Mafrika okay,
First and foremost, so I want to apologize. Yes, I object me. I was not aware that you have the election. And being a military man, usually I believe to be on time. So I was not on time because of him. That's the first thing. And then unfortunately, I have not heard. One is, as a result, was not able to hear his own presentation. So I'm standing here in possibly end. So now, if I end, please, my apologies for that. Yeah, no, you are handling a topic. When you told me about the topic, I asked myself, do you really have to start debating such topics? I was not sure whether there's any need to debate, to talk about the neo-colonialism. But sitting here and listening and, hearing the emotions that I hear, then I start to realize that probably it is necessary, but we should tailor-make it to, fit the situation, so that all of us will debate it at the correct level. Because neo-colonialism is a philosophy, it is quite deep. Sometimes it is difficult to in the context of South African politics to can exactly locate it, because in its definition it can have a political. Basically, it derives from colonialism itself, and colonialism as a concept and a phenomenon is mostly political, but driven by economic imperatives, depending on who is actually interested in driving that force, which is colonialism. Now, if we understand the concept of colonialism, then we will understand our history, where we come from. Then we will know the story of Africa has been about colonialism. That is why in Africa we have been involved in liberation struggles. Now, colonialism that was imported in Africa by Europe that wanted to colonize Africa because of needs that were economic, and they realized that to satisfy their own economic needs, they have to get to Africa, because Africa was a land that was, with due respect to our ladies, it was a virgin land, unexploited at that time, and probably unexplored at that time. So now it offered a lot of opportunities for Europe, but for them to be successful to exploit those resources, then they have to come with a program, and the program is, taking over Africa and put it under its tutelage, in other words, its rule. And once that concept or phenomenon, unfolded, then it became a political process. Now, as a result of that, that is why you find a number of African countries, they were ruled from Europe, they were ruled by Britain, they were ruled by France, they were ruled by Portugal, and so on and so forth. And it was a political takeover of Africa, motivated by economic resources. But now, so it became colonialism, and then we understand colonialism from that point of view. But as a result of that, then Africa said enough is enough, we cannot be ruled by foreigners. And that is why, as a result, we experience liberation struggles, where countries, African countries, started liberating themselves from colonial masters as a result. But the problem in the liberation struggle was that in the process of that, the colonialists had already left some roots of economics that even after they had given you the political freedom, the roots of their economic interest still remained rooted in Africa. And probably that is why Nkrumah looked at neocolonialism as the most dangerous form, probably, of colonialism. But let us not confuse that with the classical Marxist analysis of economic struggles, because that one now starts to take you in another direction. And that direction will be defined in terms of capitalism, which is not necessarily colonialism. You cannot say colonialism because it's a different phenomenon, and it's a phenomenon based on economics. And then it moves capitalism, then it gets into, the ambit of imperialism, because imperialism then becomes the highest form of capitalism. You get run by the big business. So, at the end of the day, then it will push you immediately. That's why I'm saying it's a complicated subject. Then it starts now to push you into the environment of class analysis. Then you have to start, because the reality of the situation will be, if you define classes, then you start to understand that every member in a given society lives as a member of a particular class. You can, especially if it is capitalist, not the neo-colonialist, but capitalist. Then if you realize that there is a capitalist environment that is existing in South Africa, then you start to understand that all of us seated here, we are members of a specific class because of the economics of the country. Then in that sense, you start now to see a situation unfolding, and that will be now a situation now of class struggle. Then you start to see a class struggle situation unfolding before your eyes. You can hear, I'm moving away from neo-colonialism because I'm afraid it's going to be confused with certain travesties that are happening inside South Africa, which are more informed, rather than politics, they may be informed by economics of this country. Not forgetting that we, all of us, belong to a particular class. And then as a result of that, no understanding classes, then there is bound to be what is called contradiction. Because classes will start fighting for space and start fighting for umtel. You get the point. Then you have the haves and the haves not. And then you have the workers against the bourgeoisie, who are the ones that are owning the means of production. And then you have the workers that will be selling the labor power to the bourgeoisie. Then you have that situation that is today. Now, can you define that situation as neo-colonialism? That's where the problem probably applies. If you say neo-colonialism means new colonialism, it means the colonialism of a new type. It's a new type of colonialism, which at the end of the day, it means, it presupposes that it is a colonialism that still is entrenched economically, but also has political leverage in that particular country. That's how I see it. Now, can we therefore say the ruling party is a puppet of some imperialist elsewhere, or colonialist for that matter, elsewhere? Probably that is a question we need to answer. And if we say yes, then we have to identify which colonial master is the ANC, who are ruling, by the way, whether we like it or not. they are the party in government. So we will have therefore to identify which country they are puppets of and are an extension of the politics of that particular country. So for me, I will of introducing my own argument in terms of the topic. That is how I would rather approach it. Now I understand the feeling of the comrade there. It is this confusion that I'm talking about. And sometimes also it borders on mistaken ideas in the party. Because now, if you talk about revolution and the struggle, you talk about something else. It's a new territory. That I think is another parliamentary politics and other things like that. Remember, the revolution is multi-frontal. And I'm listening to people here, and you will make a mistake and you say you dismiss parliamentary politics. Be careful. The revolution is multi-frontal.
Thanks, Mafika General. I noted Mafika Silo and Mafika Bongani and Mafika Tam. Yeah, can we make it in that order? Sure.
No, really, the program director, politics commands the gun. That's why I speak out as
Sorry, I didn't answer what you said. Now he's repeating the
I think Africa Busman, you brought another aspect to say, man, Azania has experienced all forms of oppression. And really, because if you check as well, because our colonization was one of a special time. So, because that time was disagreeing with African Kuruma, our own African Kuruma. But today he went back and to do his homework. And so he had convinced me. He had convinced me, and especially when he says, no, it is both. It is both in a sense that we are from a colonization of a special time, where even as well we had the settlers stay with us, unlike the way it happened in other countries. So it really confuses us to sexually where we are. But I think Mafika even went further by breaking it down, actually differentiating between the political power and the political administration. And really, because in most cases we normally confuse the political power and the political administration. But what the ANC is having at the moment, it is the political administration. We must not be fooled by when our official Pick and Pay finding out that all these cases are the African young girls. We say, no, that's why the Pick and Pay. That's why the cases are African young girls. No, that's administrator those. They don't own the music production of Pick and Pay, or they don't control the profits of Pick and Pay. So I think that's the role ANC Ibapala at the moment. But now when they talk about the questionnaire, the Anglo, which one? Anyone. I think Leona is another. I may agree, Leona, but I think you must put up like a detail. Yeah, the questionnaire detail. But at the end of the day, check, we are moving towards same direction. It's just an issue of terminology, which terminology every user, but I think it's the same way. Because now, I think we're in a co-option and individuals. And that is why I think even after 94, there was this issue. Remember, the place has been talking about non-racialism. Machat has been talking about multi-racialism. That's why after 94, they spoke about rainbow nation. So that's what African Kuruma, no, it is both in your colonial and settler colonial state. So, because I think even the Machat and the Bantuan, that contradiction along that issue naturally, where are we? But it depends on from which perspective in terms of class we define equal A. Because maybe if we may tell the DA to say, oh, DA, tell us which state are we? But how a different view, because even remember they present a different class interest from us. And I think if you can get somebody from Azab, will give you a different perspective on that, which state are we. But for now, I think that we are in different states.
Thank you, Mafrika Silva. Mafrika Bonga, can you, Mashar?
It's Soweto.
Yeah, it's Soweto.
Mafrika, I think to be realistic, this of the state. With my own observation and my own capturing, I think Uguchi, our struggle have lost its definition here, so long time ago. If you are checking, it is not only 1994, starting from 1994. This problem, when you check, you analyze it very well. It goes back during the time of struggle. Our struggle has lost the definition here. Before, we could pass the so-called colonial minority regime. Right now, we are still strapped between each. Our struggle has lost definition after the departure of our founding fathers. The issues that have emerged today and the understanding the views, when you analyze it very well, you can find that even to date, we have really arrived at the element whereby we are able to define that what are our struggles and to come up with an actual term that this our struggle, to give an actual term to say that our struggle are this and this. We are unable to unpack to say that our struggles are derived from these problems and our problems are like this. So in order to conquer or to come up with a solution to the masses, we need to have come up with a detailed information or detailed factors to say that our struggles are this. But how, as the case, are we going to be able to explain to our people when we are unable to unpack that the problems or our struggles are formed by this and this? These are our difficulties or our struggles themselves, or our struggle. In fact, we haven't yet arrived at that fact. I think maybe we need to, even there on the front, we need to come up with a strategy maybe to redirect our workshop to say that how can we come up and say that, to define that our struggles are this and unpack them and have to give our workshop a direction in order to find out that what went wrong. Because we won't be able to find out what went wrong where we get defined that what are the problems of the day. How come we have arrived at this point? When you listen to many others, the cadres who have been my predecessors and others, our fathers, why were you in the struggle? He was carrying a card and said most of the ANC card. We need to for the part of Monday. You can see that something went wrong during that time. You want to struggle having not identified his struggle. The person doesn't know that what is his struggle, but he's carrying a gun. So how would he be able to explain to his child or the generation that is coming or generation to come? So it means something within the generation of Home Africans, the generation of our generation. Something went wrong. That is why we are able to and unpack it very well in favor of this destructive terminology. Because now, whether it's socialist or nationalist, it's been distorted in favor of destructive terminology and destructive terminologies. Whether it's socialism, if you ask a person, a socialist, to articulately come and explain to you what is socialism, today we are unable. Socialism has been defined in other way, whether it's nationalism, will come and be defined in favor of destructive terminology, because a nationalist doesn't know what is nationalism. We won't be able to explain and surpass it or unpack it very well, and able to explain to the people that why this is nationalism, this is what to achieve by nationalism, this is what we mean about socialism. It's been explained in favor of those destructive terminology and that general confusion, the poverty of ideas. This stage we are in we are in a confusion. We need to go and find ourselves. If we are revolutionaries or reactionaries, and if we are revolutionaries, we need to go down and check how must we unpack our revolutionary, how can we combine, come up with a set to define our struggle, to connect our struggle, to give our struggle a direction. Our struggle doesn't have a direction. We are not different from the charterists, whether in PAC, whether whatever. I thank you.
Thanks, Martin. I just wanted to note Kutumaki Kongani comes all the way from Delmas in Mpumalanga. Thank you very much, Mafrika, for gracing this occasion. Mafrika no too much to tell.
Comrades, I know that I should write a paper about this because this has been one of the most passionate topics that I've ever engaged. I'm reminded of Johnny Gomez, who joined the PAC right at its formation in 1959. He used to like the term phrase mongering. As we go forward, there is a proliferation of these terms and end up losing their fundamental meaning. So terms, therefore, must have very specific meanings, and we must be able, therefore, be guided by those concepts to execute what it is that we need. I've got a few quotations here that I have taken. But I'm going to start off by saying that to answer this question, neither, that is the answer. South Africa is not settler colonial, and it is not neo-colonial. I'm going to give you the reasons. Well, Lenin once wrote already in 1920 that there was already a deception that imperialism was doing in manifesting itself in the way that it was executing its business. Soweto in 1949 wrote exactly about the same thing. And yes, Nkrumah later on developed what he called neo-colonialism. But every time capitalism manifests in a different form, we want to allocate a specific term to that. It's pointless. Fact of the matter is that we are having global capitalism that is operating throughout the world. Whether we can call it neo-colonialism, settler colonialism, and all these kinds of things. Actually, you have just reminded me of something else. I went through and actually got quite a number of terms here. There is neo-colonialism, there is what is called neo-capitalism as well. There is neoliberalism, there is neo-imperialism. And really, comrades, you can go on and on about all of these new manifestations. But that's not the point. The point here that I'm trying to make is every time we come up with an adjective that seeks to define what that content is or what the essence is, we actually get lost. The emphasis here should be on fighting capitalism in all its manifestations. It doesn't matter. We are gathered here in order to establish a socialist democracy, a socialist social order. So everything that is capitalistic, it does not matter how we define it, Comrade Nkrumah. The fact of the matter is, it is still capitalism. So it is really pointless. One of my favorite authors is Samir Amin. Samir has written quite a lot on what he calls imperialism. He started by questioning Lenin's fundamental basis, how Lenin conceptualized this whole issue of imperialism. And he said, no, imperialism has always been operating right from the beginning of capitalism. That is true. Now Nkrumah went further. You'll remember that Lenin had said it is the highest stage of capitalism. That is incorrect. Nkrumah went further and decided that he must also have his own higher stage. And within imperialism, then he discovered a higher stage that is called neocolonialism. Possibly I must also find myself also some space there to define another higher stage within neocolonialism. It becomes ridiculous. The fact of the matter here is that we are having capitalism on the ground, and it does not matter what color it is still capitalism. That is the emphasis on it. But I must really go forward and really discuss quite a number of issues here.
These concepts that we are using need to therefore inform our strategies as we go forward. That should be the purpose. And I see the value of this workshop only in terms of that. They should define therefore what must be done thereafter. How do we chart the way forward? The other risk of utilizing these different terminologies is also that we end up creating more and more of these terms to actually refer to the same thing and therefore lose the entire plot and eventually confuse the masses. So it is really pointless to keep developing these terms. My belief is really that with the global capitalism in operation, there is no country under the sun that is not under its spell, that is not under the global capitalist spell. In the United States, the global capitalists determine who rules that country. And you can go throughout the world, that is the same phenomenon throughout. So if therefore we will say every government under the sun is influenced by the capitalists, then we should also conclude that all the governments on earth are also neo-colonial. That becomes ridiculous. What is the point then of saying neo-colonialism as if we want to distinguish it from another different form? Ernest Mandel in 1964 wrote about neo-capitalism, a phenomenon in which capitalism was really becoming quite efficient. And he also wrote about state capitalism as well. Yet another definition of all of these are different kinds of capitalism, and the essence is still capitalism. It must never be lost. At least if there's anything that you can take from this discussion here today, it must be that it does not matter what you call it, it is still capitalism. And actually I will go even further to suggest that we remove all of these adjectives and we focus on what the crux of the matter is. And that crux of the matter is capitalism. I will really go to some of the conclusions that I have written here. I'm going to leave this document here. There have been some studies that were done, actually, particularly in the Australian National University on the phenomenon of settler colonialism. These are very interesting studies, and what they have concluded is that wherever settler colonialism ever manifested on earth, it has never been removed. Settler colonialism will always be there, or at least the effect thereof will continue. Now there are two strategies to fight neo-colonialism. You remove the settlers, you eject them out of the country, or you get them, well, the rest actually, it will never get rid of settler colonialism. Because every time these settlers will still continue to constitute themselves as a group and try to reverse every time that every effort of decolonization. So we have got that phenomenon, but it would be incorrect to say that the settlers are in charge. They are not in charge. They are definitely not in charge. I'm also reminded that in 1961, when South Africa got its so-called independence from Britain, South Africa was a neo-colonial state even then. So what is the significance of saying that now it is neo-colonial at this stage and it is not neo-colonial at that stage? That neo-colonialism has always been there, and therefore to me it becomes irrelevant. It does not define the essence of the matter. Coming to settler colonialism, there was a political revolution to just take on what committee started. There was a political revolution in 1994. But then there is an oligarchy that took over. That is now a bureaucracy within the ANC that have been running with this. There is a phenomenon that is called polyarchy, in which a minority of people selected by global capitalism are given the responsibility to run a country. And that has been the manifestation throughout. And in most countries, what we say as democracy is actually a polyarchy. And ladies and gentlemen, this is precisely the term that I want to bring on board, that we must start defining this state as a capitalist polyarchy. Not settler colonial, not neo-colonial, and not even Anglo and so forth that The fact of the matter is that we are having a bureaucracy here that is actually managing the affairs of global capitalism, and that is the bureaucracy, therefore, that we need to overthrow. I must emphasize here that in 1994, white domination was overthrown. There has been a lot of discussions, because that is the next point. When then we say that if we say settler colonialism is still in existence, then I will ask you, but are we saying therefore that white domination is still in existence? And I'm going to tell you right now that that cannot be the case. Precisely because if you go back to the Pan-Africanist Manifesto, it clearly states that white domination is a unique manifestation of imperialism here in Africa. It is how Europeans politically subjugate, economically exploit, and socially degrade the African people. It must be Europeans doing all these three things against the indigenous African people, otherwise it is not white domination. Today, African people starting at that end are actually being exploited, politically subjugated, and socially degraded by not white people, but by some multiracial polyarchy that is managing the country. It is multiracial, it is not necessarily white or European. And therefore, we cannot be talking of white domination today. There is a phenomenon called white supremacy also, and I see that as a superstructure of I will go further, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, to confirm that white domination was overthrown in 1990. The effects, the vestiges thereof are still really intact. You can go on and you will see the poverty, the unemployment, and the inequality. All of these things will still be there. If we had a socialist revolution tomorrow, and 10 years later we are still migrating towards a socialist state, would you call that state capitalist or socialist? Surely there would be vestiges of capitalism within that state. Remember, the state must eventually wither away. You cannot call it a capitalist state, definitely. It is not. So bringing therefore these concepts from the past and dragging them forward actually just helps to obfuscate the entire matter. And we really need to be very clear to apply what I call here Occam's razor in trying to eliminate all of these ambiguities so that we know what we are about. I have said here that neocolonialism is not a stage or phase of imperialism. It has always been there right from the beginning, and therefore it's pointless to make as if it is a certain phenomenon other than capitalism, which is the same. Actually, I will also give you a very interesting formula here. In the periphery, back to Samiramin. Samiramin has talked a lot, or written a lot, about the center periphery phenomenon. That is actually the essence of the operation of imperialism. The fact of the matter is all the center countries are plundering the rest of the world, which is called the periphery, in order to enrich themselves and to export the crisis of capitalism that is endemic in their own countries. So they keep postponing the revolution in their own countries by exporting this crisis and by actually dragging the working classes within those specific countries in the center. Now that is the center periphery type of phenomenon that I wanted to emphasize. But that center periphery phenomenon always manifests. It started right from the beginning, from the inception of capitalism, and it still manifests today. And that is the kind of strategizing therefore that we need to do. Most of them develop some theories around the three worlds theory, in which you said that the countries of the second world and the third world must partner together against the countries of the first world. Of course, it is ridiculous, because in every one of these countries, you have got different classes, and every one of these different classes is opposed to the others. They can never be united in some kind of united front against the first world countries, including the working classes and the bourgeoisie and so forth. We need to go much deeper in terms of analyzing what we are talking about. Therefore, the second state is, to me, a polyarchy. It is a capitalist polyarchy. The vestiges of secular colonialism coming to a conclusion here will still remain for quite some time. They can only be resolved through a proletarian revolution that will put in place the working class in power, and that will therefore chart the way. Actually, our 5 aims are very clear on this matter. You overthrow white domination. I believe that has been done in 1994. You move forward, and that is now what we should be talking about is how we establish socialism, how we effect the socialist revolution. And in Sobukwe's mind, it was actually very clear. Actually, I must say Ramurwapa as well, because he's one of the people who drafted the manifesto. It was very clear to them that once you have overthrown the political domination of the white people in this country, you immediately establish a socialist state. There was not going to be any transitional stage in which we actually try to develop the bourgeoisie, that they can, try to have some kind of multiracial capitalism. That's why Sobuka has said any kind of Well, he had said that all the kinds of apartheid are actually even democratic apartheid or apartheid with justice, and you can call all these kinds of things, must be destroyed. Apartheid must be destroyed. There is also, in these studies of the center-periphery phenomenon, what is called the triad. The triad now is the United States together with Japan and some of these European countries. These are the countries who are actually driving the entire global economy in terms of capitalism. And I believe that therefore our efforts, all of us and all of these countries in the periphery, and including China, by the way, are also influenced by the same triad. China has become an industrial machine of what that triad wants. Every time they want anything produced, they will actually hire somebody in China so that China can further exploit its working class to produce these products for the triad. These are the enemies that we need to direct ourselves at. But then what is the solution here? The solution to all the kinds of phenomena that we are talking about is to delink. By delinking, it means that we must have a socialist revolution. You must have some kind of federation of the Southern African states. You must strive towards the unity of the continent in order to have a very formidable socialist power that will be able to self-sustain. That is the only solution. I must also state that cyber colonialism must be defined in terms of empowerment of the indigenous people. This is one of the results of the studies that were made in this Australian National University. That we can only reverse cyber colonialism by indigenization, by empowering the African people specifically in this country. And unfortunately, this bourgeois polyarchy, we definitely not do that. That is why, therefore, we need to always talk about a socialist revolution. It can only be achieved through a socialist revolution. There's no other mechanism. But how do we get to a socialist revolution then, from where we are standing? It means that we need then to take one step back and look at how the socialist revolution can only be driven by the proletarians. But these proletarians currently are under the spell of these neoliberals that Jose had indicated earlier on. How do you capture them? It is by establishing a nucleus of cadreship within this organization and within the revolutionary left that will connect directly to the vanguard of these workers across the board. Once you have established that nucleus, they will be able, therefore, to transform every member in the PAC into a cadre, and every supporter of the PAC into a member, and the rest of the population into the supporters of the PAC. And I keep emphasizing PAC all the time. This revolution is about emancipating the working class, the proletariat. It is not about bringing PAC to power. It is about emancipation. So whatever, we must emancipate our people by whatever means necessary. It means that we must be able to partner then with the rest of the revolutionary forces across the country and across the globe for that matter in order to achieve that objective. Even if it means that we must change a name, even if it means that we must front with other progressive organizations, that is what must be done. I just want to react to some of these statements that were made also on parliamentarism-only strategy. Of course, it is doomed. The idea here, actually Marx had put it quite well, that once the proletariat wrests the power, they cannot keep that state intact. They need to smash it. Without the state being smashed, there can never be any progress in terms of a socialist revolution and the economic advancement, cultural advancement, and so forth of the African people. You need to destroy that state, establish a new state that is a proletarian state to implement socialism. It cannot be implemented by a bourgeois state. The conclusion immediately that you will draw from that is therefore we really need a very organized nucleus. And I must tell you now that the PAC is not necessarily that nucleus. According to me, somebody has said here earlier on that the PAC belongs to the members. I'm telling you today that that can never be the case. The members will come and go, so will the leaders. The only constant in any organization will be its cadreship. It will be you, those cadres who have actually sacrificed, comrades Siaya and so forth and so on. Comrades who have sacrificed, who have served throughout that process, who have actually pledged and built this organization with their blood. These are the people to whom the PAC belongs, and not to the members. I want to emphasize that. Precisely because the members today, if a Helen Zille buys them a cow or give them another t-shirt, they will just simply go and vote Helen Zille and still come back and participate here. I must go back a little bit further. We said that we must transform, we must establish a Cadre nucleus that will orchestrate the activities of the Cadre movement with the intention of transforming every member of the PAC into a cadre, every supporter into a member, and the rest of the Azanian masses into the supporters of the PAC. That is the only strategy comrades that I believe can effectively be implemented. In summary, therefore, to me, it is really irrelevant whether we call it neo-colonial. According to me, that has always been capitalism. That is how capitalism has always operated right from the beginning. We should therefore not call it neo-colonial. Settler colonial, it is definitely not settler colonial precisely because we are having an African oligarchy that is running the show and not Samapo. It's on the basis of that that I'm saying, therefore, Comrade Bruma, scrap both terms. You need to define this as capitalism that is run by an African oligarchy. Easily.
You're all noted. Africa, I'm impressed. I'm impressed in terms of the efforts that have been done. You know, Africa Tony was not in the speaker's list. That's fine. He was not in the speaker, but he prepared a paper around this topic. Africa, thanks for the effort. It does not matter if I agree with you or not, but the effort you have put to contribute to the workshop, to the enrichment of the workshop in terms of writing down is very important. And we need to learn that, Mafric, to really put our thoughts into paper and let the ideas contain Mafric. You know, let us be a vibrant organization. But Mafric, I'm worried. In Atikani workshop, that's why I'm worried. It seems now the workshop is starting. And I'm also looking at the time, the time first, you know. So, Africa, I will need your guidance. What do we do now? Because I'm standing here, I'm listening to the contribution of Africa. He's saying what domination has been, and I know it's going to create, discussion. African see, I know it's itching to answer. I know African says itching, to argue no African. And no African see, I know he has got something to say around what African was. Now, Africa, I need your guidance. What do we do? Do we have a particular time to say this workshop must end within 30 minutes or 20 minutes? Or what do we do? Please guide me. Africa.
Yes, I'm going to propose that we don't have a shock. I will propose that we therefore take on some of the essential or salient issues of the discussions, write them somewhere down there, say 3 or 4, and we tackle those before we close. Then we will have a much more focused approach to the discussion.
Okay.
And in terms of timing, I think another hour, then we should be done. Quite right.
Now, first of all, South Africa, give each speaker 2 minutes, so that we can end in the next 8 minutes.
Yes.
I'm going to propose one idea, so that it does not only become a talk show.
Okay.
Right? I agree with 2 minutes, but it cannot end like that.
Yes.
Right? So that Mafka, they air their view with their perspectives. Right? For the next 10 minutes. Then what this end to is structure, as Mafka has proposed. Right? So that must be exposed further, particularly around the issue of way forward, which I think is more critical.
Okay. Thanks, Mafric. I'm going to use my powers now as chair. Mafrica, we are going to be out of here by 5 o'clock. It's 4:30. By 5 o'clock we'll be done. Can we agree? Yeah, by 5 o'clock. Whether we have resolved or not, Africa will be done by 5 o'clock. I'll open questions and comments. Africa was. Oh, so that we cannot. Africa will not pay. Sorry.
Yeah, Africa, I feel very much surprised by the contribution of Africa. And then I'll just put my mind on other things. Myself, I still believe it's a new colonialism. Yeah. We have moved from a settler colonialism because a settler colonialism is dominated by foreign government. And then a new colonialism is a colonialism within what the Mafia is explained as a multi South African nationals, including white and blacks. So it's a new colonialism. That's why it's so difficult for other people to explain. Now, this is a domination by a national, I would say a national bourgeoisie or a national computer bourgeoisie. Why I'm saying it's a new colonialism? I think if we look back when this term was diagnosed, it has a certain meaning. And I'll only state few that it says it's a government by an African by which the status quo will remain. And then by which economical power will be gained without economical power. I think based on those two things, I think it's what I still believe that it's a neo-colonialist state that we are in. Because we didn't crash the settler colonialism in total. So it is still exists. I'm not saying it's there, but it's replaced by neo-colonialism. Now it's existing within the background of the neo-colonialism. Well, South Africa is a puppet country or what? I believe South Africa is a puppet country. It's a puppet country to World Bank, to IMF, to all these international bodies like ICC. And I mean, this is enforced by the UN Security Council. Security Council. And then also US, Britain, and recently China are included as the masters of our neo-colonialist puppet. So South Africa is a puppet country, I believe, because it takes orders from those that I mentioned. I'll just be simple. The biggest thing that I've learned from Africa's contribution and learning from Jose also is that over the years we failed to enhance our ideology. We failed to develop ideology from the era of Soweto until now. So we are still stuck with all the diagnosis and the theoretical thinking that was done 40 years back. So that's the biggest problem. We fail to enhance our ideology. And then that forced us to fail to provide strategies, because we need strategies now. We need strategies to confront all the changing phases of capitalism, I would say. And then I agree with Africa that the whole issue is informed by capitalism. It was capitalism that influenced white or foreigners to come here to dominate us. So it is capitalism that is our problem. But now within that capitalism, like Australia, you move in I would say in blocks. Now I believe these terms represent those blocks. That today, when we wait, Mandela is the president of this country, but the state remains the same, the situation remains the same. Then what can we say is this? Oh, this is what we say is a new colonialism. Now, it's a block that we have to confront and deal with it. So these terms will always be there. We cannot fight a struggle that has no terms and say we're fighting capitalism. Then one will say, who represents capitalism? Then it's a problem. Like he says, that almost all countries, they have the same problem. We have the working class that is crying all over the world. And then to some, those countries are independent countries, some are socialist countries, but still they experience the same problem that we are experiencing. Now, in those terms, it dictates to us to to identify all these problems that we have in small blocks, so that we are able to confront each. Yeah, I think that's my submission.
Can you repeat that definition of neocolonialism?
Oh, let me go. It's not a definition as such, but it's one other thing that in a neo-colonial state that would say that the status quo is made. Now, this status quo, we are talking about the settler colonialist status quo, because these people, they came, they took by force, and they maintained by force. But now we have a new government that comes, it doesn't destroy that. This state, it allows that to flourish under the new system, which is represented by neo-colonialism. And then the other one, I said, they gave, that's why there's a contradiction in power. I mean, they have got the power to decide. They are in the majority. They can vote for any law, and then it can be changed. Now that means they've got the state power, they've got the political power. Unfortunately, they own nothing except what they have been given. That's represented by the buffalo and so that's how I say that due to this, the system that we are in now is a neo-colonialist system.
Okay. Yes, you had a very nice definition, but you don't have to repeat it. You had a very nice definition of what is neocolonialism.
No, it's captured on camera.
Oh, no, that's fine. Can you prepare to read perfect?
Yeah, there's 2 points that I'm quite interested in. Firstly is from the general CI on neo-colonialism, capitalism being different phenomena. I beg to differ. In actual neo-colonialism is a manifestation of capitalism. It manifests itself. Had there be nothing in Azania that those particular colonialists wanted, or in Africa that particular Africanists wanted to accumulate fair capital, they were not going to come, trust me. They were going to leave Africa. They colonized you simply because they wanted to accumulate capital in a way or the other, through dragging you into it and so forth. Therefore, for me, it is a manifestation. Capitalism manifests itself through colonialism. In actual fact, not only through colonialism, I can even say even through slavery. Even through slavery, is capitalism manifesting itself through colonialism, even through neo-colonialism, and so forth and so forth. As a comrade, I was saying, we must not be obsessed about technology. But at the end of the day, the struggle is always a class struggle. Yes. There's no other struggle. The struggle is the class struggle. It's the oppressor versus the oppressed. In various and different epochs, it has always been about the oppressor and the oppressed. You have the slave and the slave owner. You evolve, you move over, you have the slaves and then the lords. Today you have the proletariat and the bourgeois. The mother of all struggles is a struggle about food. The mother of all struggle is the class struggle. I think Angels was right when he said the human being must eat first before he exist. So, all these other things that we think of, whether it is racism, white supremacy, and you can call them in various terms, but they are nothing but a manifestation of an oppressor oppressing the oppressed. And it is misleading, it's very misleading to suggest that they came as a result of colonialism. It's very misleading. Nkrumah proves in his book that even before colonialists could set their foot in Africa, economically superior tribes used to colonize or enslave economically weaker tribes. Yes. It has always been a struggle about food, nothing else, machine. Machine. A protector machine. Nothing else. General capitalism manifests itself through neocolonialism. They are not necessarily different phenomena. Comrade Tao, moving very quickly. You know, when you say this, it sounds like phrasemongering. When we say neocolonialism, settler colonialism, then you move very into something center phenomenon. Yeah, I said, he is doing exactly that. It sounded exactly what you are condemning that we mustn't do. We shouldn't phrase monger around these particular things and call it in all these various concepts that one needs to call it. You are right. In the epoch that we are living in, struggles against capitalism and nothing else. You can call it in various ways. Against capitalism, and even the very struggle that you are fighting, your national struggle, your race struggle, is nothing but part of the struggle against capitalism. It ends there and it goes nowhere. There is no one who can be racist unless that particular person has some form of an economic power. I'm living in Tswane. There is an area called Denvi. They are working class white people there. And I can assure you, it is not possible for them to be racist. In actual fact, what happens is that they suffer from racism from our economically better off Africanists. They are like, just like these Africanists are Pakistan who in this model, they are doing the same thing. They are suffering racism. They are suffering racism themselves. It simply clarifies that it's not natural that a person can just be racist. It's as a result of him holding an economic power over the other. The mistake that we have made in the party is that we glorified manifestations of capitalism more than capitalism itself. In other instances, we glorified the national question. In other instances, we glorified the race question, and so forth and so forth. And we failed to keep uniform the fact that capitalism is the mother of all struggles.
Thanks, Marcus. Africa Andes, you can see now that we need a veil there at head office. For the whole year to discuss and workshop. So I'm sure you have noted.
I forgot to mention that we need 5 policy conferences in the PAC every year. So that we can
Yes. Africa Andes, so I'm sure you are noting the passion in terms of discussing. These are the PAC members. Africa, I want to acknowledge the people who have just come. Matapelo, welcome. From the Zola branch, welcome. I also see you, Mamso. You know, I'm baffled with this term veteran. But whenever I see Mafuku Somu, I want to attach that concept of veteran. Mamso has been with us from Azani until now. She's still with us. Welcome, Mamso. I've noted Mafrika, that side, Mafrika Siaya. I've noted you. Let's start with something.
Jesus. First of all, I must say that I'm puzzled by these debates. I don't know. I was going to feel comfortable to speak these things in the language I know how, but I'll just try this one. Mafia, what I want to point out is that politics to me, it is an activity
of controlling society, both social and economic imperatives. Now, on itself, as I'm putting it tells me that politics, at the end of the day, addresses more a question of bread than anything else. Now, as we address that, now look at characters of how one addresses the question of bread. As Musa was putting it, there's a question of machine. Here now I'm talking about Yard or Mahema, as we put them in English, they say capitalism. Those who want to take everything for themselves. This is a war against those who want to share the bread and those who want bread itself. Now, as to how these people who want all the bread for themselves, how they portray themselves in society or how they appear in society, their form. To me, it matters not. Whether they come as white, green, whether they come from Japan or anywhere in the world, it matters not. The character is what we must fight. Capitalism is the aim. Now the question whether this is now looking this side or it comes from there, it becomes entirely irrelevant. The war must be directed to capitalism.
I've noted all the ends. Let me give the ends.
John, you skip me.
No, I've noted all because before you can.
Oh my God. I said it, I don't know where to start. This is a big topic. It's quite big. Because you need to go to back to basics for you to understand what, because and then mass. That is why, of course, I like this. And I will always like this. He stood up and said, disagreed with me, but went on to agree with me. No. I said colonialism is a political phenomenon. I used that terminology. I said it's a political phenomenon. And you cannot run away from that. It's like that. You must go back to this literature. Fortunately, it's a petit bourgeoisie. You're able to go back and read the class analysis. Because you will realize among the oppressed, the suffering people, they are broken. That's why you have the workers, you have the petit bourgeoisie, you have the peasants. They have the struggle of their own within themselves. So this thing is, you should sky about it is deeper than that. So I just wanted to emphasize. I'm asking, I'm worried about the comment next to this. No, you really need to do classics as much as possible. Most of the things that he said are wrong, I can tell you. I can tell them one by one and prove to him that they are wrong. The world is not like that. The life of I don't have the English word.
It's wild.
No, well, it doesn't sound nice. But
it sounds nice because we are singing in African.
Yeah, the basis of if you go to MS, the development of man from ape to man is a result of men struggling to survive. And in the process of trying to survive, the body starts to adapt to his methods of trying to supply. And as a result, that is why it developed from being an ape and started to walk upright and have limbs that he can use to walk and limbs to use to hunt in order for him to eat. It has been understood. But you must not confuse it and think that it's all about that only. It is also coupled with the politics of it. These are inseparable. Because the problem with who wants to separate the politics and look purely on the economic side. No. For you to be able to achieve the economics, you have to bring the politics on board. And this is the thing that I'm saying. The politics are defined by colonialism itself. I want to disagree with Utab when he says that imperialism is not the highest form of capitalism. That's wrong. Imperialism is the highest form of capitalism. It is. No, it's a political. No, it's going to political classes to unpack that. It will take a long time for me to take it. But the bottom line is that imperialism is the highest form of capitalism. Because he is bringing a new terminology. He talks about global capitalism. What is global capitalism? Global capitalism is nothing but imperialism. It is imperialism. Capitalism is localized. Capitalism is localized. Imperialism is internationalized. So I just wanted to correct this mistaken idea.
Thanks, Mafrika. Mafrika, I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Mafrika Bongani from Soweto. Thanks, Anna. Mafrika, I want to keep my word. I set a certain time frame, and I want to keep my word, Mafrika. I'm going to allow Mafrika Ntsiye and Mafrika Kuruma to give us a summary or what you call concluding remarks. After they've given us that, I would like to give the honors to Mafrika Andiswa, just to give us a vote of thanks, Mafrika. But it's important because this cannot be it. This cannot be the it workshop where we are saying, now we have come up with a resolution, Mafrika. I don't believe that. I think it's a start of a process where we need these kinds of workshop, perhaps culminating into a policy conference at national level. This can be the IT workshop. I want to add, Mafrika. We still need papers to come forth, perhaps have a follow-up workshop, Mafrika, whether in PV or at the PAC head office. I'm not sure. But Mafrika and this will give that vote of thanks. Mafrika, I want to keep time. I'm going to allow Mafrika Kuruma and Mafrika Ntsiye to summarize. Mafrika Kuruma.
Next one.
Mafrika, can you summarize, please? Mafrika,
you know, because like what is going me to speak is because what Africa is said. As I partially agree with him, and Africa was what is said. Africa, when he said this capitalism, slightly I want to agree with Vusi a bit, because for me it's more of domination than the capitalism, because we have seen even in other countries who perceive themselves as socialist or communist coming here to dominate. When Africa was slightly echoing my sentiment when it says it's about economics, it's about machine. Like for example, in America today, we have a situation like during the recession where it becomes socialist, it becomes capitalist at the same time. In a sense that we introduced the National Creditors Act, which paralyzed us, which didn't fund emerging entrepreneurs, we didn't get houses, but the government in America, when it comes to its own people, exercised a kind of socialism because it gave them loan when they are unemployed, it even bailed them out. It bailed them out, even Finland, Scotland, all those countries. Therefore, it became a bit of socialist content. And also, we've been relating with China. And China has always been perceived to be socialist. Sometimes it's socialist to its people, very repressive, sometimes it's capitalist. So therefore, whatever form that it takes from a foreign domination, it should be cast in its whatever form, whether it takes socialist structure or a pseudo-socialist or a capitalist, so that we have what guys like Gaddafi said that we establish a continental unit, as Africa has said, an African bank, because we move away from the dollar currency, which has enslaved us. We have our own IMF of some sort. Therefore, we move. And just short and sit on.
You had noted this. That's what I was. I will be very brief.
It's very
thank you very much. Yes, okay, my issue is just on this issue of capitalism, not imperialism in the high stage of capitalism, neocolonialism, neocolonialism in the high stage, not of capitalism, now of imperialism. So you get all of these layers. The fact of the matter is that as far as it is capitalism. And I want to quickly read from the basic document because I'm not getting the stuff anywhere. So what we wrote already, the very first paragraph, the significant portion, the preamble, the significant portion of our social media begins with the expansion of markets founded by the rising commercial capital. And that was already in the 16th century. He went further to state that the Atlantic Chattel slavery was the greater prompter to capitalism. These processes have always been intertwined. I'm trying to show here that capitalism from its inception was always globalized. It has gone to the extremes now, but that is how it actually operates. You need to see chattel slavery across the Atlantic in the context of capitalism itself. And I'm going to show the comments and the rest of the documents, on a one-to-one, just to understand what we mean by all of this. And that's what this comment has just said here. Precisely, when America is doing good to its own citizens because of the plunder of the colonies, it is a phenomenon called neo-capitalism. So there are so many neos and all these kinds of deflations of these terms. The fundamental issue here, it is capitalism, and therefore that is what we need to direct our efforts against. Easily.
Can you summarize?
I'm not summarizing to say whether we agree or disagree, but I think what this particular workshop has done is started to provoke a discussion around issues in terms of defining where we are and also to define the program moving forward for the party, right? But in my document, if you pick up, right, amidst that I've said neocolonialism, settler colonialism, what cuts across for me, right, is the dominance of capitalism through us, right? And conceding to the view that capitalism on various stages has always manifested itself in different forms, right? Yes, I agree with African oligarchy, right? That's what Cabral and Fanon put it, right? They put it as neocolonialism, but further expose the fact that a certain section of the African being captured by the system, right, to serve an advanced interest of. But what remains the foundation is the very same capitalist system that continuously persists and to perpetuate its own interests, right? That's the fundamental struggle that we have. And I think some will also put it when he says that we are seeing within our own day the second rape of Africa, a determined effort by imperialist powers to dig their claws still deeper into the flesh of the screaming victim. But this time, the imperialism we see is not the naked, brutal mercantile.
Yes.
Right? Which means that someone is saying that, look, imperialism, capitalism is still there. However, it's adapting itself. It's using new methods. Right? Now, the limitation, I agree with both. That the limitation of the party is that some of the issues, like what Africa General says, right, is that if we have had enough time as a party to engage on continuous ideological and political debate and discussion, refining our program and strategies, right, we wouldn't be having this particular political discussion. Because some of the issues would have been long cleared, right? And one of our challenges, not only as PAC or South Africa or as Africa, is that even when you speak about capitalism, I mean, Europe had a capitalist experience when. So we are generations behind, right, in terms of where they are and so forth. So it's more of how do we begin to understand some of these particular issues? Hans Fanon says, is it Fanon, that it is not always linear and prescriptive, that a nation must move linear from one stage to another, but you can still leap from one stage to the other, depending on the contradictions that are prevalent within that particular society and understanding, right? But first, not starting another debate and discussion, but probably, and I don't know if it's the branch and so forth, but this begin to say for me is that there are other issues that we're able to agree around. What comes out from our discussions is that there is a common understanding and agreement that there's manifestation of capitalism, right? African clothing argues we maintain capitalism, not imperialism. Others maintain imperialism. Probably we need another plot to say, is there a distinction of capitalism and imperialism, right? And many other writers and so forth. Probably it's another discussion. And this part of discussion is for also to bring on board new party members, right? With the whole idea of building up a party cadre, such that we don't take for granted some of the issues that have been understood. Now this becomes manifestation of what of capitalism has probably been discussed here. The issue of white supremacy and white domination, probably coming. I saw him being uncomfortable around to say that it has been abolished in 1994. Right? He's not comfortable with that. But I also say in Africa that, and the limitation comrade was of Kwame Nkrumah when he wrote about neocolonialism, he did not apply his mind about the situation of South Africa or Central colonialism. Right? Hence, his writing find resonance with other parts of Africa, Congo, and so forth and so forth. But the experience and the effect, let's think about the effects of Central colonialism are not adequately accounted by Kwame Nkrumah. Which then makes peculiar our own situation. Right? And therefore we cannot absolutely and totally import neocolonialism as written by Nkrumah, but we need to be able to contextualize in terms of our own historical development yes, I agree, the struggle against capitalism is far much more paramount, right? And all the terrains are terrains of struggle, whether it's parliament, whether it's by seizure of armed revolution. That is always dependent upon objective existing conditions within the country and the prevalent contradiction. If tomorrow PAC assumes political power, the question is that can it succeed to advance that with the revolutionary program? Right? No, you can have a coup. Right? That brings the argument of throws in terms of the permanent revolution. It's another debated discussion. Isn't it?
Comrade, with Comrade Tam, we have started arguing. He wrote this long. It's not that we started this topic during the funeral of Comrade Beningwe. So we are arguing. We started there. So he started writing from there. It's not because I was also arguing when he was saying that the country was neo-colonial during Amapu. I was saying that no, in relation to us, the Africans, would not say it was neo-colonial because we were dispossessed. And Amapu wanted independence from Britain, yes, on their own, because they said there is no place for us in their society. That is what they said. We are not part and parcel of that. So maybe his neo-colonial independence to Britain, but Britain still was controlling the economy. So if he was arguing about that, but about the Africans, I said no, it was not neo-colonial. I still dispute that. If he says it started as neo-colonial. And also this one, because I agree with comrades here. Capitalism is local. When it expands, it becomes imperialism or monopoly capitalism. Because now companies, they compete. Now, if they compete, it becomes monopolized. So it becomes cartels, banks, and all those. So imperialism still says is the highest stage of capitalism. Because the capitalists may compete at the local, and when they expand and go out, they become monopoly. So hence the highest stage of imperialism. And also about colonialism. It has got both political and economic. In 1885, remember the Berlin Conference of 1885, when they sliced Africa into pieces. The then French Prime Minister, Jules Faure, said, we need colonies for 3 reasons. 1, for the raw materials of the colony, for the sale of the product of the home country, and for the investment of surplus. Those are 3. Yes. But now, in order to do that, my man, in order to do that, you must also bring political order. You must suppress and control that. So it has, they're both. So they are both political and economic. Hence they suppressed, they brought in guns, what, in order to control that, politically to control.
That's a consequence for it.
Whether you call it yeah, white domination. Usobukwe, who called when they asked him about white domination. What do you mean by white domination? White domination, it means the political control or the administration, the economic control, and the social control of the white minority. That is white domination. Now, if you say in 1994, white domination was completely removed, I don't agree with you.
Overthrown.
You say it was overthrown, and I say it was never overthrown. Unfortunately, there are a lot of papers here. I did not read, I just summarized. But what is actual fact? If you say it was overthrown, let us look at this. We continue paying apartheid debt, which is an odious debt, which was the debt of the colonizers. And in 1993, when I'll read this. In 1993, Mandela endorsed the apartheid regime's agreement to join the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade, which is GATT, which effectively surrendered the economic independence and in the same year to repay the $25 billion of apartheid debt inherited from foreign debt. Guaranteed the Reserve Bank formal independence and accepted the loan from the IMF, and in 1995 abolished exchange controls which allowed wealthy whites to take their capital overseas. Incredibly, the finance minister then, which was Emmanuel, later allowed the South African biggest companies to flee to their financial home and set them up in London. And what they did there, they only changed the personnel, but the content remained the same. It is the white people who still control the land today and the rich resources. Yes, and the black faces or African faces are there. You see? That is why, yes, we understand, maybe in terms of definitions. That's why I was saying it is Anglo because it is who owned here are the British and the Afrikaners and other multinational corporations. So we're defining the state who were there. If you remember in 94, They said it is power sharing. De Klerk was the deputy in order to oversee the fulfillment of their own interest. So by only putting the Africans to run that, and you know, the ruling class determines who owns the means of production. And who owns the means of production? It's still them. Well, with of course the co-opted, some of the Africans who are co-opted, they have used all these where they take money, the people, the companies, giving them money so that they can go Sakima and all that. So they have just co-opted those. But in actual fact, the land is still with them. Whether you like it, yes, we can philosophize, but it is true. The land is still with them. The economy is still with them. And right now, the white companies are the ones who are recolonizing Africa now. They are going out of Africa, using the ANC government as a social imperialist in the continent. They are using that. We agree in terms of socialism and capitalism. That we agree. You see, we agree in terms of capitalism, contradiction to capitalism. But we must recognize that we were colonized. So it was not just the African people were dispossessed of their land, they were colonized. Before we talk about capitalism and all that, yes, it is because of the interest of capitalism. And that's why we're clearly understanding that Pukela, when he said, the national and class factor are inseparable. The dispossession, and then the question here, the economic exploitation, because they made us to be workers, of course. So those they go hand in hand. So we shouldn't just ignore the national factor. Yes, the primary factor, of course, the class question is important. And that is that one. So give it definition. Some of the things we agree, you see, but give it definition, give it language. But in terms of how socialism is the only solution, we agree. And we agree that we must turn the PAC into a vanguard. It must only be the vanguard. It cannot only be the workers that we say. The workers must be led by the vanguard to take over. And when the vanguard takes over, and it won't just be easy, of course, it becomes very difficult by saying that we can take over through the election. Remember the 1971 Orlando, when they took over through election, they were overthrown because they were not representing those interests. So it is also important for the working class or for the party also to have forms of control when they take over. So that's what we are saying.
Thanks a lot. Africa, let's go into announcements. We've got an apology from the grandchildren of Mafrika Nyawuse. I think he was in the first MEC of the PAC as Secretary for Labour. We have made contact with his grandchildren and they had promised to come here, but they forwarded Mafrika Nkuruma an apology. The second announcement is around the Johannesburg regional meeting. It will take place on the 9th of December. On the 9th of December at PCC, Pinville Community Center, at around 10 a.m. The last announcement I have is around a meeting in Pinville on Tuesday at Musi High School. It's around prepaid meters. Mafrika, Pinville is going to experience a big thing when the prepaid meters are about to be installed. We as a branch have decided to unite with the community against the prepaid system. Africa, we have talked about programs of action and all of that. We've put that into paper. But this is a real struggle against prepaid meters. So we are going to plan a campaign with the community and civic organizations. So Africa, PIMV is going to be a site of struggle, especially next year around January and February when these things come here. So put all your energies and refocus on this particular area. It's going to be a serious site of struggle, and the PAC is going to lead that struggle. So next week Tuesday in Africa at Musi High at 4 p.m. the community is going to gather and hear what the PAC and other progressive organizations are saying around prepaid meters. Africa, those are my announcements. I don't know if anybody has any announcement. Africa.
Africa, I think you still remember the struggle around Soweto, where I'm Africa, Tom Africa, Jambo are part of the accused. So, we are going to court this Thursday, as we are moving party was postponed to week 21 is January. And my plea is that Africa, please, let us avail ourselves and have a picket outside the Soweto Magistrate Court. Because if you don't do that, this case is being depoliticized. Now, so I are criminalized, so hence we know what they were involved in a political activity. Particularly because we're not even sure what they pay. ANC. Now you actually say if you claim my insurance. So we must push those things in the public of Africa. It's really
Africa, is there any other announcement?
Okay. Comrade, it's not an announcement. It's a question to an announcement. It's a question to an announcement.
No, so we want an announcement.
It's not an announcement, yes. But I think it's vital that I ask this question.
Okay.
Chairperson, I think we have seen on media and television the issue SNLs. And we have seen that the Jewish regime is quite taking gigantic steps there. So if maybe in summary, as part of announcement, just a wrap-up for us to say how far we are with that program and other issues.
Okay, no, Mafika Boman, Mbonisan, before Caesar Williams.
Yeah, okay, it's just a good thing of you get a national leadership. Yeah, on the 14th Africa, 14, 15, 16, yeah, they will be electing Congress, PAC. So everything will be communicated through Africa, but in Tanzania, Africa, even if I can see you are not used, but land color because you belong from branches.
We're very used.
I was passing the message to the elders. Yeah, okay. In your branches, comrades, can you please tell your young Africans they must also contact the officer of the spokesperson of the PAC. Then, yeah, young kid is
there any mass meeting at Lens coming very soon?
No, so far, I say mass meeting, I got the information in court.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it was because of the intervention of the Minister of Human Settlement that the momentum is right down. Yeah.
Okay. But Africa, in a nutshell, we were involved in that struggle, and we are still there. So it's just a question of just now specific dates, but we are fully behind the people. Africa, now we come to the item of vote of thanks. Africa, I just want you to really wrap up for us and perhaps tell us some of the announcements from the national office. Can you come through?
You're putting me in a deep frying pan. I was invited here to be part of the workshop, but not to make any announcement from the office. But first, Africa, I would like to thank you very much I was invited in the first workshop by Africans, but unfortunately I had to attend a burial, so I could not attend. And after that, there were things that somehow caught me not to attend the workshops. But I must say, I'm quite encouraged, I'm quite revived, because I think as a political organization that has been in the forefront of the liberation, we have been in areas in terms of engagement politically, and it has actually led to all the things that we are experiencing now, the infightings and everything. Our focus has changed, and the reason I'm saying I'm encouraged is because we haven't had workshops, but I think members who are the owners, who are the shareholders in the organization, feel it as a responsibility upon themselves to say that seeing anything and everything that is going on, we need to begin to take the first step. Whether we say, since I've indicated that we're in areas, I'm not sure whether our workshops will have to go back from 1994, because that's where perhaps we needed to redefine ourselves to say this is, now that we've had all these changes, this is the path that we're supposed to be taking forward, and continue with political deliberations from at branch level, because I think Africa CIA has correctly pointed out that most of the things that we are talking about in all these workshops, they need to be unpacked. We need to understand that we come from different backgrounds, and with the current system of education that is going the other way, we can expect nothing but less of intellectualism throughout the path that we move. I've indicated that I'm not sure where we should be starting all of these things, but I think we need to begin to have some kind of thinking process within ourselves to say, in the political arena that we are in, where should we start? The communities need us. And for a long time, and as far as I understand, the PAC has been misinterpreted. And that only said to me that perhaps we are not speaking the language that people understand. And that is the biggest challenge that we are having. That when we speak of all these bigger terms, are we able to go through each and every person that we would, at the end of the day, say we have turned that ordinary person to be a PAC member. So those are the challenges that I think we need to go through and think about them, and perhaps we will find solutions within ourselves, because someone might come here and say, "Yo, it's a workshop of academics. I feel threatened to even raise a hand and say something." And also another challenge that we have is that with our women, Africa, I think most of our women feel intimidated. Hence, you will find in these gatherings that it's a male gathering. And it's one of the things that we need to check. Because if we are looking at building party cadreship, we need to look into all of those things. Are we chasing our women away? Are we making them feel intimidated? Are we making them feel less of anything? But at the end of the day, who loses? The party loses. So Africa, without wasting any time, I would like us to think about these things and perhaps say we have these workshops and what do we want to achieve. And at the end of each and every workshop, we need to go back and say, have we achieved 1, 2, 3? So, thank you very much. We will continue with all these things that we see as predicaments within our organization, but we need not lose sight of the bigger picture. The bigger picture is the PAC being there and not for Andis and not anybody else. So with all those words, this is what I think.
Africa, cishe sivalile. So bonana ke in the next workshop. Siyabonga. Zweli.